Chapter 1041. The carriage was shaking in the autumn wind, and there was a whistling sound coming from the window. Raindrops came from the wind, and the curtain was wet in a short time. The oil lamp in the carriage was flickering, and it seemed that it would go out at any time. Under the light, Chu Yuxian looked pale, not because of fear, but because his father, who was sitting opposite him, was even paler than him, and he was crying. Tears streamed down old Master Su's face as he gripped his son's hand tightly, refusing to let go. Perhaps it was because the carriage was shaking too violently, but his voice was trembling as well. All these years, we've spent tens of thousands of taels of silver on you. The family wanted to give you a good life, but who would have thought that we would send you down this road of death? If I had known this, I wouldn't have let you enter the academy. Hearing this, Chu Yuxian was silent for a long time. Suddenly, he lifted the curtain and pointed to the gray sky in the wind and rain, saying, "Father, a person's life is just like the sky. No one can predict what kind of weather we will encounter. But I know that we will encounter something sooner or later, so we have to do something big. The thing between the imperial court and the divine hall this time is the biggest thing in the past 1,000 years. He retracted his hand, pointed at his own nose and said, "And I, your son, am going to handle this matter. Don't talk about a few thousand taels of silver. Even if you take out 10 million taels of silver, you won't be able to buy this position. But what's the use of you going there?" Old Master Chu cried and said, "Whether the imperial court or the academy wants to negotiate with the divine hall, it's the bigwigs' business. It doesn't matter if you go or not. It's their business. Why do you have to take the risk?" Chu Yuxian didn't explain it clearly, and said, "Don't think too much. Didn't you say that we will fix the genealogy in the spring? You have to do it well. If I really can't come back, my memorial tablet must be placed in a good place." Old Master Chu was furious and scolded, "Stop saying such unlucky words. You are the only child of the Chu family. How can you die?" Chu Yuxian didn't take it seriously, and said, "I'm just saying." Old Master Chu slapped him on the head. He knew that he couldn't change anything, so he forced a smile and scolded, "Even if you die, how can you expect to fight for a good position in the ancestral hall? Don't tell me you dare to put it on your grandfather's head?" Chu Yuxian said angrily, "If I die, I will die for my country. Why can't I?" The curtain was lifted slightly, and the wind and rain seeped in. Chen Qi walked in with an expressionless face. Old Master Su knew that it was time to leave. He sighed and walked out of the carriage. Looking at his father's stooped back, Chu Yuxian was speechless. In the end, the father and the son laughed and scolded each other. It seemed that the atmosphere was much more relaxed, but he knew very well how his father felt at this time, just like everyone in Cheng, and knew that they were going to die. Chen 7 ignored his emotions at this time. He looked at the file in his hand and said, "If you don't want to die, don't think about dying." There were two people who wanted to die in the same sentence, so the meaning was naturally different. Chu Yuxian looked at the think tank of the Fish Dragon Gang and sighed, "They say that you are resourceful, but I really don't believe that you can find a way out of this dead end." Chen 7 still lowered his head and read the information on the file in the dim light. He said, "Those are not important things." After a moment of silence, Chu Yuxian smiled and said, "You are right. It is not important whether we can go back to Cheng and alive or not." Everyone knew that they represented the will of the Tang Empire and the Academy in this trip to the divine halls of West Hill. But they did not have an official identity. They were Ning Kei's personal representatives, because they had thousands of bloody heads in their hands, which could not be put on the table to tarnish the reputation of the Tang Empire and the Academy. So if the negotiation failed, they would naturally leave their bloody heads on Peach Mountain and would never be able to return to Chang'an. Just as old Master Su was sad and puzzled, many people did not understand why the Imperial Court and the Academy sent them to the divine halls of West Hill. Negotiation was only done on the edge of a knife, but on the battlefield, it seemed to be completely unnecessary. The wheels of the carriage squeaked on the bluestone pavement. The carriage slowly moved out of the city. Chen 7 and Chu Yuxian did not speak anymore. It was not important whether they could go back to Chang'an or not. That was not their task. In this trip to the West Hill, apart from promoting Ning Kei's cold-bloodedness and showing the thousands of heads, their real task was to send a message to someone on Peach Mountain. That message was very important. It could not be written on paper or spoken. The person who heard it was in the depths of Peach Mountain, and even Mr. First of the Academy could not see her. Therefore, even though the road ahead was dangerous and they might die, Chu Yuxian and Chen Seven still got on the carriage without hesitation and started their own journey. When Chu Yuxian and Chen Vii's carriage drove out of the city in the autumn rain, the person who asked them to send the message was in the imperial study of the palace, staring at the curtain of rain and the tender chrysanthemums in the imperial garden in a daze. In the imperial garden, the young emperor, surrounded by eunuchs and palace maids, walked to the back hall. Looking at the figure by the window from afar, he stopped stiffly and bowed deeply, which was not in accordance with the etiquette, just like how he greeted his teacher who was drifting outside. Ning Kei nodded and watched the emperor's figure disappear in the palace. Then he reached out to close the window to keep out the cold wind and rain. Turning around, he looked at the thinner woman behind the desk and said, "When you are free, go out of the palace more often. You should know how beautiful Chang'an is in autumn when it is not raining." Li Yu's face was a little pale. It was not because she was ill, but because she had not seen the sun for a long time. After the rebellion, she had never left the palace. Listening to Ning Kei's words, she smiled and did not say anything. She did not explain why she could not leave the palace, because he knew everything. Those courtiers who were once loyal to you no longer dare to betray you. So you don't have to lock yourself in the palace to avoid arousing suspicion. Ning Kei looked at her unchanged expression and knew that it was difficult to persuade her. He frowned and said, "Even if you don't want to leave the palace, you should walk around in the imperial garden, boating on the lake, and picking willows by the lake. I am not saying that these artistic scenes are important, but you must keep healthy before His Majesty truly matures." Li Yu put away the scroll and said calmly, "I can live for another few decades. But why did you come down from the city wall today? Don't you need to keep an eye on those horrible bigwigs? Aren't you afraid that something will happen during this period of time?" Ning Kei had lived on the city wall for a long time. He used his iron bow and iron arrows to frighten the powerhouses in the wilderness, just like the drunkard used his speed and killing to frighten the emperor, ministers, and soldiers of the Tang Empire. "I have to take a break," he said, "and some things have to be confirmed before I can be at ease." The disputes in the world were not over. The war between the Tang Empire and the West Hill Divine Palace was about to start. The Academy was not outside the world, so it naturally had to care about these things. Ning Kei trusted Li Yu's ability to govern the country, so he had to get confirmation from her. "I have deduced it many times before. If the Academy can't kill the drunkard, the war will not even start, let alone win." Li Yu looked at him quietly and said, "Do you have a way or not?" Ning Kei said after a moment of silence, "I still need some time." Li Yu said, "That is the problem. The drunkard wandered the world and was not afraid of killing people. He was the biggest threat facing the Tang Empire. If they could not kill him, the war would just be empty talk. For the West Hill Divine Palace, this was not a problem. They could choose when to start the war, and the timing was very important to the victory of the war." Ning Kei said, "So we have to wait for a while." Li Yu said, "So you let Chu Yuxian and Qinshi go to the West Hill Divine Palace?" Ning Kei said, "The joys and sorrows of the world cannot affect the drunkard, but it can affect Taoism. We can only hope that Taoism can affect the drunkard." Li Yu said, "What if they can't?" "Fortunately, people like the drunkard and the butcher never do meaningless things, including meaningless killing. They are Haotian's dogs, so they must carry out Haotian's will. And the person who interprets Haotian's will is on Peach Mountain." "You mean the Abbey Dean?" "Yes." Li Yu said, "If Chu Yuxian and Qinshi go to the Qinghe River, will the clans talk to them? If they know that you have killed so many people?" Ning Kei said, "The more people I kill, the more the clans in the Qinghe River will want to talk to me. Even if they don't talk, they will at least invite them to dinner. Li Yu was a little worried. She looked at him and said softly, "But the more people you kill, the more famous you will be. Even the Tangs can't accept such a killing." Ning Ke thought of the scene he had seen from the window and the fear and unhappiness on the face of the young emperor in bright yellow. He couldn't help but laugh at himself and said, "I'm not like eldest brother after all." Li Yu said, "You can be like that." Ning Ke said firmly, "I don't want to be like eldest brother. Because he is just a good person, but not a person who can talk to the whole world." Talk to the whole world? Yes. What do you mean? When I speak, the whole world must hear my voice. Has there been such a person before? Of course the headmaster can do it, and so can eldest brother. But they didn't. Because as I said before, they are good people. Who has done it? If youngest uncle didn't exist, Lotus could definitely do it. Even if he has to destroy the world. That is his purpose, not mine. Ning Ke paused and said, "I just want to talk to the world." It was just a talk. His attitude was very gentle, even a little reserved and humble. But somehow, Li Yu felt that the air in the imperial study had become cold, even colder than the autumn rain outside the door. She walked to Ning Ke's side and opened the window, letting the wind and rain in, as if she felt that she could get more warmth this way. The autumn rain kept falling in the imperial garden. The golden chrysanthemums were still dazzling, as if they were burning. But in an inconspicuous corner, there were many broken branches and fallen leaves. The wet soil half covered the fruits that were about to rot, like skulls. The entire Tang Empire was shrouded in the cold autumn rain. The withered trees by the road were as wet as the pedestrians under the trees. Just like the execution grounds in each prefecture, there was sticky blood everywhere, and all kinds of skulls were soaked in the blood. This autumn, Ning Ke wanted to talk to the world. Just as he had said to Qing Lishue, since the world refused to listen to his voice quietly, then he would put all his chips on the line. Those falling fruits in the autumn rain and those skulls soaked in blood were all proof of his determination and will. Under such circumstances, Chu Yuxian and Chen Qi's carriage drove out of the verdant canyon, past the misty rain, and arrived at the Qinghe prefecture. Hundreds of crossbows were aimed at the carriage, and dozens of powerful cultivators in the see-through state were waiting silently in the alley on the side of the street. The bigwigs of the warlords in the Qinghe prefecture were not in the manor by the Fuchen River, but in the largest restaurant in Yangzhou. As long as they gave the order, arrows would fall like rain, and dozens of powerful cultivators would attack together. The people in the carriage would not be able to survive. There was dead silence in the restaurant, and the heads of the warlords did not say a word. "I haven't seen you for a long time." Bow to the ground. I suddenly think of the sentence I often heard on the Spring Festival Gala. "I really miss you." Those who follow my Weibo should know that I have been suffering from tinnitus for the past 2 months. That kind of frustration and pain is hard to imagine for those who have not experienced it. I can only say that I am numb now, but I have to continue living and working. There are some things that should be endured. Perhaps this is the time when I am being tested by Junior Marshal Uncle's words. Please help me get through this period. Thank you very much for your concern for me. Let's live a good life together. This chapter is definitely very messy because I couldn't sleep to write it. I will find time to revise it. I will try to write it tomorrow during the day. Thank you again. Chapter 1042. I've been away from Jianghu for a long time. I didn't know that I was charging 500 words now. I'm sorry. Finally, I thank you. The restaurant was named Jinsui, a famous and luxurious place in Yangzhou City. The dishes were extremely exquisite, and there were several ancient dishes that had been passed down for thousands of years. They could not be found in Chang'an City. For the bigwigs of the warlords of Qinghe County, these were nothing. Their attention was not on the table at all. No one raised their chopsticks or glasses. The steam rising from the plates was quickly blown away by the autumn wind and gradually cooled down. "Master, should we kill them?" The steward knelt on one knee outside the door and asked in a trembling voice. He could no longer stand the dead silence in the room and wanted an answer as soon as possible. The two men in the carriage were envoys sent by Chang and City to the West Hill Divine Palace. The hatred between Qinghe County and Chang and was as deep as the sea, and there was no room for reconciliation. In order to declare their loyalty to the West Hill Divine Palace and help the Divine Hall solve their inconvenient problems, they had no reason to leave the carriage. Yes, the West Hill Divine Palace wanted these two people alive, and there were some people in the West Hill Divine Palace who wanted them dead. Those people's will was very clear. However, after a long time, even the faint sound of the wheels rolling on the stone slabs could be heard from afar. The room was still dead silent. The masters of the warlords of Qinghe County were either livid or cold. Their lips did not move at all, and they did not even blink. They were like statues. When Jun Mo brought Mu Yu to the manor by the Fuchin River, Ning Ke, who was far away on the Peach Mountain, killed the old master of the Chui family with an iron arrow. Since that day, the warlords of Qinghe County had lost all their confidence and were no longer as sharp as before. Therefore, these masters were hesitating and struggling. No one could make a decision. They had to have enough information to help them make a decision. Therefore, they were waiting for the latest news from Chang and City and the news from the various states and counties of the Tang Empire. They wanted to know if the imperial court of the Tang Empire had really done what the rumors said. They wanted to know if that person was really so ruthless. Several sharp whistles cut through the gloomy sky and the patter of autumn rain. They entered the restaurant and brought the most accurate news. Yes, people were killing in Chang'an, the Gushan Commandery, the Northern Military Camp, the Verdant Canyon, and everywhere in the Tang Empire. Thousands of captives were executed. Half of the families of the Tang priests who betrayed the divine halls of West Hill were executed. He Mingqi's entire family was executed. Even the family of Xiong Chumo, the hierarch of the divine halls, seemed to be lying in a pool of blood. Too many people died in the autumn rain. The people in the restaurant were mentally prepared for this. They did not forget that in the spring rain, just before the Tang Empire and the West Hill Divine Palace reached an agreement, Ning Ke led the Yulin Royal Guards and the Fish Dragon Gang into the Guild Hall of Qinghe Prefecture and killed everyone inside. Those who had died in the Guild Hall back then were their brothers, their children, and their relatives. How could they forget them? The clan lords' expressions grew increasingly gloomy. They were like ice sculptures under the scorching sun, exuding a chill from head to toe. However, they still did not give the order to attack the carriage on the long street. After a long time, the dead silence in the restaurant was finally broken by an old voice. It was the clan lord of the Song clan, who was the most senior among the clans. He looked at the autumn rain outside the restaurant and said weakly, "Please come upstairs." There was no fighting or killing. When Chu Yuxian and Qinshi walked into the restaurant and walked up the stairs, they saw the 7 clan lords behind the threshold. They saw a peaceful scene and heard very gentle greetings. The dishes on the table had been changed. They were steaming hot and fragrant. The candles under the plates kept them warm even in the cold autumn wind. The clan lords were like statues that had come to life. There were gentle and reserved smiles on their faces, and their eyes were full of enthusiasm. Some of them took Chu Yoxian's hand and sat down, recalling the scenery of the academy in the old days. Some of them bowed to Qinshi and drank with him. They began to discuss which female dealer in the Silver Hook Casino in the western city was the most beautiful. It seemed that they had returned to the old days when the clans treated the imperial envoys from Chang and carefully and dignifiedly in Yangzhou City. It seemed that nothing had happened between the two parties, that the Tang navy had not been destroyed in the Great Swamp, and that the officials loyal to the imperial court had not been hanged by them. It seemed that Ning Ke had not entered the guild hall in Qinghe Prefecture, that the spring rain had not fallen, and that the autumn rain this year was also fake. After the greetings came the banquet. Although it was not the autumn wind, the clans hoped that the banquet was to welcome 2 people who had come to ask for money. These 2 people represented the imperial court and the academy, so it was the imperial court and the academy who wanted to ask for money. No matter what they wanted, it was fine as long as they did not kill anyone. The clan lords' voices were very low, which was covered by the autumn rain and the tactical array. Even if the great divine priest of the West Hill Divine Palace came in person, he might not be able to hear them clearly. What do Her Highness and Mr. 13 want? The clan lord of the Song clan looked at Chu Yuxian and Qinshi, and said humbly, money, mines, and even my life, we can talk about it. Ning Ke wanted to talk to the world, and in fact, the world also wanted to talk to him. After he had killed so many people in this autumn rain and expressed his attitude to the world, just as he had predicted, Qinghe Prefecture really wanted to talk to him. The heads had already been laid out. The families in Qinghe County had to consider their future plans. The Divine Hall might win in the end, but they were stuck between the Tang Empire and the Divine Hall. How many of them could survive after the war? However, things in the world were always unsatisfactory. In the past, when Chang and wanted to talk, they did not want to talk. Now that they wanted to talk, it was Chang and who did not want to talk. At least Chu Yuxian and Qinshi did not want to talk. They could talk about the scenery of the academy and the beautiful dealers in the gambling house, but they did not want to talk about these things. Because Chang and knew very well that Qinghe Prefecture could not return to the Tang Empire, and this was also the premise of the clan's talk. In this case, it was better not to talk. Seeing Chu Yuxian and Qinshi only eating the delicacies on the table, the clan lord of the Song clan said after a moment of silence, "Is it meaningful?" Qinshi put down the ebony ivory chopsticks in his hand, looked at him quietly, and said, "What do you mean? Killing people? No matter how many people Mr. 13 killed, even thousands or tens of thousands of them, what else can he do after killing all the captives and hostages?" The clan lord of the Song clan said worriedly as if he was one of them, "After all, he can't destroy the world alone." Chen Seven looked at him in silence and then looked around. He looked at these noble clan heads dressed in embroidered robes and had an extraordinary bearing. Suddenly, he laughed. He felt that it was just like what Ning Ke had said before he left Chang'an. It was really interesting. The more people they killed, the more docile they would be. Even if they were still burning with the flames of grief and indignation, they would not dare to do anything. Qinshi's smile gradually disappeared, and his eyes became calm and deep, giving people a strange feeling, which gradually made people at the table uneasy. Qinshi thought of what Ning Ke had said, but he did not say it out loud. He asked directly, "Who wants to kill us?" The clan lord of the Song clan answered without hesitation, "Hierarch." At night, Qinshi and Chu Yuxian sat at the table, thinking about the previous banquet and the conditions put forward by the clans. They looked at each other and could not help shaking their heads. What are these people thinking? Are they betting on both sides? Don't they know that they have no right to bargain? How dare they expect the imperial court to accept the current situation and only pay taxes without stationing troops? Chu Yuxian said sarcastically. Qinshi said, "It's impossible for the clans to side with the imperial court. They just want to show some goodwill in advance. Mr. 13's killing has really frightened many people. Besides, these people in the south always have an inexplicable sense of superiority. They always feel that they have something to gain. Otherwise, why would they betray the West Hill in the first place? But they have no idea what Mr. 13 wants." He thought of what Ning Ke said again, and could not help shaking his head and laughing, but the hidden meaning in his smile was so cold. Chu Yuxian said, "I don't know how Wang Jinglu is doing." Qinshi said, "He has been negotiating with those young people on behalf of Mr. 13 for several years. I think the negotiation should be going well." Those bigwigs of Qinghe Prefecture in the restaurant thought that Ning Ke's killing was meaningless, but they did not know that in Qinshi's eyes, their banquet was meaningless. The people Ning Ke wanted to talk to were never the heads of the clans, but some young people. He thought that they were the real hope. The next morning, Chu Yuxian and Qinshi set off again. They accepted the kindness and money from the clans of Qinghe Prefecture, but did not leave any message. The heads of the clans stood on the shore and watched the ships gradually disappearing in the mist of the great swamp. They felt a little cold when they thought of Qinshi's eyes in the restaurant yesterday. Because it was the eyes of a dead man. The great swamp was so vast that the shore could not be seen. Sailing on it was like sailing in the ocean, which made people feel small. Chu Yuxian knew that he would die if he went to the Peach Mountain, so he relaxed and enjoyed the lake view. He stood in the drizzle with a pot of fruit wine in his hand, like a scholar in a desolate state. Unfortunately, his mood was soon completely destroyed, because the shadows of many huge ships suddenly appeared on the surface of the lake. Those ships were extremely huge, and their sails covered the sky. They moved on the water like moving mountains, and their auras were astonishing. The navy of South Jin was here. Chapter 1043. Chu Yuxian looked at the thousands of huge ships on the lake and the invincible navy after the destruction of the Tang navy. His face turned pale. Hearing the commotion, Chen Qi walked out of the cabin, and his face became serious. He did not expect that the South Jin kingdom could regain its stability in such a short time after Lu Yiqing killed the young emperor of the South Jin kingdom and the sword Garrett moved away. The Tang Empire was well prepared for this war. It seemed that the divine halls of West Hill were not slow either. The South Jin navy sounded the bugle and the fleet dispersed. The lake water slapped against the sturdy sides of the ships, making a loud noise. A huge ship slowly sailed to a few thousand feet away from Chu Yuxian and Qinqi. It stirred up countless snow-like waves and scared away hundreds of water birds. Hundreds of cavalrymen stood on the deck with their horses. They looked majestic. They wore black armors with golden talismans on them. They were the most powerful papal cavalrymen of the divine halls of West Hill. Chu Yuxian was curious why the horses were not afraid of the wind and waves. Qinqi's attention was focused on someone among the cavalrymen of the divine halls. He could clearly see that person's face from a few thousand feet away. It was not because he had sharp eyes, but because that person wanted him to see it. It was a manservant in indigo clothes. His tender eyes were full of unquestionable arrogance and his innocent expression was full of cruelty, as if he regarded human lives as worthless. Immature but arrogant, innocent but cruel, it seemed very harmonious. Because immature people tended to be arrogant, and innocent people tended to be cruel. The manservant in indigo clothes stood between the lake water, the autumn rain and the world. It was so harmonious. Qinqi had never seen him before. But judging from his appearance and feeling, he could guess who he was. He was Hengmu Liren, the most generous gift Haotian left to the human world. I'm curious. What does Ning Ke want to tell you when he asks you to go to the divine halls of West Hill? Can you tell me in advance? Hengmu Liren looked at Qinqi and Chu Yuxian and asked seriously. Chu Yuxian was a little nervous. Facing the youngest powerhouse in the knowing destiny state of the divine halls of West Hill, he felt that he could die at any time. But Qinqi remained calm and shook his head. Hengmu Liren frowned and was not pleased. The water around the ship seemed to have sensed his emotion and began to sway in fear. The lake water swayed gently. Not far away, a patch of autumn reeds was instantly crushed into powder, blown into a blizzard by the lake wind, and then washed into the lake by the rain. Chu Yuxian felt that his throat was so dry that he was about to smoke. Qinqi remained calm, but his hands behind his back began to tremble. He knew Hengmu Liren was powerful, but he did not expect him to be this powerful. Could Ning Ke defeat him if he left Chang'an? Hengmu Liren suddenly laughed, like a happy child. It could be described as a smile. He looked at Chu Yuxian and Qinqi on the opposite boat and said with a smile, "Don't worry, I won't kill you, so you don't have to be so afraid." He was clearly smiling, and even looked a little cute, but there was an inexplicable sense of disdain, like an eye in the sky looking down at an ant on the ground. Chen Seven didn't like this feeling and said, "People will die eventually." Hengmu Liren shook his head and said, "I'm just living here temporarily. I'll go back to the divine kingdom after I finish my business." Separated by hundreds of feet, Qinqi had to use a lot of strength to transmit his voice to the big ship on the opposite side. His soft voice sounded like thunder on the lake. Chu Yuxian felt goosebumps all over his body, not because of the thunderous voice of this young and powerful cultivator, but because of the burp. Chen 7 suddenly said, I suddenly thought of something that Mr. 13 said. Hearing Ning Kei's name, Hengmu Liren became serious. He leaned forward and said seriously, what did he want to say to me? Chen Qi repeated, you will all die. Not you, but you. Even Hengmu Liren was not qualified to be said by Ning Quebec. His words included Hengmu, Long Qing, He Ming Qi, the heads of the warlords in Qinghe Prefecture and the enemies on the grassland. Hengmu Liren frowned and said, everyone will die, but I won't. Chen 7 said, if he said you will die, then you will die. Even if you escape to the Divine Kingdom, you will still die because he will chase you to the Divine Kingdom and kill you. Those who were supposed to die would definitely die. Even if you go to the Divine Kingdom and obtain eternal life, even if you go to the underworld and become ghosts, I will still kill you, or more than once. Ning Kei wanted to talk to the world about many things, and what Chen Qi said was one of them. Hearing this, Hengmu Liren sneered and said, he doesn't even dare to leave Chang'an. How can he talk about the Divine Kingdom? After getting ashore, Chu Yuxian was still scared. He kept blaming Chen Qi for saying Ning Kei's words. If Hengmu was really irritated, they would definitely end up worse than those reeds that melted into snow. He has a high position in the divine halls of West Hill. He said he would not kill us in front of the navy of South Jin, so he won't kill us. Chen 7 said, most importantly, the divine halls of West Hill wants to know what Mr. 13 wants us to say. Before they know, we will be safe. But didn't you see the look on Hengmu Liren's face? He looks so innocent, but he is actually a psycho. What if he really goes crazy? Chu Yuxian nagged. But Chen 7 was thinking about something else. Hengmu is leading the army of South Jin to the north. He will soon take over the affairs of Qinghe Prefecture. Where is Long Qing? As the former divine son of West Hill, Prince Long Qing had a high position in the hearts of the followers of Taoism. But as time went by, Ning Kei and Hengmu Liren had taken away his glory. But Chen 7 knew that Ning Kei thought Long Qing was much more important than Hengmu Liren. He believed that Ning Kei's judgment would never be wrong. It was not a good thing for such an important figure to suddenly disappear. Chu Yuxian said, according to the information from the Imperial Center Administration, the prince has led a group of cavalrymen of the Divine Halls to the Song Kingdom to kill Yi Su. Chen 7 said, Yi Su has thousands of followers of the new stream. He can't go too fast. Long Qing should have caught up with him by now. Chu Yuxian said, I don't understand why the Oracle Yi Su did not go to Chang'an, but took such a great risk to go to the Song Kingdom. Chen 7 said, in the words of Mr. 13, Yi Su is a man who can really change the history. How can we judge such a man with common sense? The two kept moving forward. The autumn rain gradually froze and then turned into snow. The roads in South Jin were gradually dyed white. When they arrived at the West Hill Divine Kingdom, it was already the beginning of winter. In the land blessed by the gods, which rarely snowed in the past, the wind and snow were raging and it was extremely cold. In recent years, the human world had become colder and colder, but no one knew why. On the border of the West Hill Divine Kingdom, two red-robed priests were waiting with dozens of papal cavalrymen of the Divine Hall. There was no kindness on their faces, not even an expression. Their slightly frosty eyes were full of indifference and vigilance. Chu Yuxian and Chen 7 were envoys of the Tang Empire, so they deserved such treatment. They were very satisfied that they did not use divine skills to burn them into ashes. After a few days, they arrived at a vast mountain range. The wind and snow finally stopped. The mountains were green and charming, and some majestic buildings could be vaguely seen among the peaks in the distance. They should be the legendary divine halls of West Hill. Looking into the distance, Chu Yuxian slightly opened his mouth and did not say anything. He only let out a sigh. As an ordinary person in the Haotian world, he was shocked to be able to see the divine halls of West Hill in his lifetime, even though he was a Tang. Chen 7 had to calm down. As the brains of the Fish Dragon gang, he habitually observed the military defense of the West Hill Divine Kingdom and the mental state of the cavalrymen. Of course, he was most concerned about the 3 arrays that covered the Peach Mountain. He was not a cultivator, so he could not even see the cyan light. Naturally, he could not understand the horrible power of the array. But he was concerned about it because even Mr. First of the Academy could not break the array. The 2 red-robed divine priests seemed to have received strict orders. They did not say a word to Chu Yuxian and Chen 7 all the way from the north. They also arranged everything without asking for Chen Vii's and Chen Vii's opinions. The silence made the atmosphere a bit depressing. Chu Yuxian and Chen 7 did not take it seriously. They kept silent until they arrived at the small town in front of the mountain. Suddenly, Chen 7 asked them to stop the carriage. Looking at the red-robed divine priest's eyes, Chen 7 said expressionlessly, "I haven't eaten enough on the way. I'm going to buy something to eat." They were only a dozen miles away from the Peach Mountain, and there were many powerful Taoism cultivators hiding around the town. The red-robed divine priest did not think there would be any problem, so he nodded. Chen 7 and Chu Yuxian left the carriage and walked along the road to the town under the protection of the papal cavalrymen. The town was really small. Besides, it was past lunchtime, so the restaurants were closed. The only food they could buy was roasted sweet potatoes. Standing in front of the roasted sweet potato shop, Chen 7 and Chu Yuxian held the hot sweet potatoes in their hands, carefully peeling them and blowing at them. They looked a bit funny and cute, not like 2 messengers who were responsible for the safety of the world, but 2 kids. Chen Vii's fingers were burned by the red and yellow sweet potato meat. He quickly shook his hand and asked the boss for some cold water. When the boss put the basin in front of him, he looked up at him and thanked him with a smile. Chen Vii's fingers moved in the water and left a fleeting handwriting. But the boss didn't seem to see his movement and turned away without any expression. It seemed that there was no deep meaning in his movement, but in fact, if the head was separated from the body, he was shaking his head. Back in the carriage, Chen 7 was a bit disappointed when he thought of the response he saw before. He shook his head and said, "Mr. 13 said we must eat the sweet potatoes in this shop, but I don't know what's so good about them." It was not until then that Chu Yuxian realized that he had finished talking with the man in the roasted sweet potato shop. Hearing this, he knew that things were not going well, so he inevitably felt a bit down. The hard wheels rolled over the bluestone slabs, making a creaking sound. The papal cavalrymen of the West Hill Divine Palace were everywhere. When the sunlight fell on them, it was reflected by their black and gold armors and through the windows, making them squint. Chu Yuxian and Chen 7 looked at each other and squinted in silence. They came to the divine halls of West Hill to negotiate with the world on behalf of Ning Quebec. Logically speaking, the divine halls would not kill them before they heard what they had to say. But the battle that almost happened in Qinghe Prefecture showed that someone wanted them dead, and that person was the Hierarch Lord of the Divine Halls of West Hill. Ning Ke was not talking to the Hierarch Lord, which might be a bit humiliating for the Hierarch Lord, but it was not enough to make him want to kill them. Now it seemed that the Hierarch Lord might have guessed something. Thinking of the scene where the man in the roasted sweet potato shook his head, Chen 7 said with a heavy heart, "How can I pass the message if I can't even see him?" The Divine Halls of West Hill did not arrange for them to go to the Peach Mountain, but to live in the Revelation Institute in front of the mountain, which was very close to the famous Peach Blossom Valley. Unfortunately, it was winter now, and it was hard to see the beautiful scene of peach blossoms all over the mountain. Chu Yuxian was very sorry about this, and he seemed to be a bit heartless. Chen 7 knew that he was pretending, but there was nothing he could do. Everything was arranged by the Divine Halls, and they could only wait anxiously. The Divine Halls did not give them more time to be anxious. The bigwig in charge of the negotiation came to the Revelation Institute in person the next morning. Zhao Nanhai was the direct descendant of the great divine priest of light from the South Sea, and he was the most powerful supporter of the Abbey Dean. After the war, one of the Divine Halls of Light or the Divine Halls of Revelation would be reserved for him. There was no doubt that he was a real bigwig. He came to talk to 2 ordinary people like Chu Yuxian and Chen 7, which showed enough respect for the great Tang and showed enough sincerity. But Chu Yuxian and Chen 7 did not think so. Before leaving, Ning Ke had made it very clear that there was only one person in Haotian Taoism who had the power to speak. There was only one person who could and was willing to respond to the wishes of the Tang Empire. If they wanted to talk, they could only talk to these two people. "I'm sorry." Chu Yuxian was very apologetic. He bowed and said, "It's not that I don't want to talk, but I really can't." Zhao Nanhai had been in the South Sea for a long time. Even though he had returned to Haotian Taoism for several years, his skin was still dark. His divine robe fluttered even though there was no wind. "You are the ones who want to talk, so you should be the ones who are anxious." Zhao Nanhai did not get angry. He looked at the two thoughtfully and said, "Let's talk when we want to." After that, he left with a dozen red-robed divine priests, leaving no chance for Chu Yuxian and Chen Seven to speak. Looking at those people disappearing on the mountain road, Chu Yuxian said bitterly, "They don't even want to know who we want to talk to? Why are they so vigilant?" In the following days, Chu Yuxian and Chen Seven were forgotten by the people of the divine halls of West Hill. They spent all their time eating, sleeping and looking at the peach blossoms in the Revelation Institute. The peach blossoms on the Peach Mountain used to bloom all year round. However, they had been cut by the headmaster of the academy and then tortured by Ning Ke and Sang Sang. They had become extremely weak and could not survive the cold winter. They were blown into the mud by the cold and no one cared about them. Chu Yuxian and Chen Seven felt that they were the peach blossoms that no one cared about. No one came to visit them. They could not see the people they wanted to see, and no one listened to them. It seemed that the negotiation that many people had high hopes for was going to end without any progress. The divine halls of West Hill was indeed not in a hurry. As long as the academy could not kill the drunkard and the butcher, Taoism would be invincible in this war. No matter how many people Ning Ke killed, it could not change the fact. Therefore, they should be the ones who were in a hurry. Ning Ke's purpose of killing people in the autumn rain was to frighten Taoism and the human world. In a sense, he achieved his goal. But what he did also ignited a fire of anger in the human world. Whether it was the West Hill, the South Jin Kingdom, the Golden Palace or the Yen Kingdom, those divine priests, soldiers, and people whose loved ones died in his hands all wanted to skin him alive and eat his flesh. He did a great job in mobilizing the divine halls for the war. As time went by, the situation in the world became more and more favorable to the divine halls of West Hill. Ordinary people might not understand it, but people on the Peach Mountain did. There were many people who could understand this trend. For example, the bold and resourceful Chanyu of the Golden Tribe in the wilderness. He knew very well that this long winter was not a torture for him and the warriors in his tribe, but a wonderful wait. Therefore, the fragrance of wine from the magnificent and exaggerated tent in the north of the city of Wei grew stronger day by day, and the number of cattle and sheep slaughtered around the tent that was like a cloud field increased day by day. People in the Golden Palace were happy, just like what Ning Ke saw when he returned to the city of Wei. Ada should have been happy too. In people's eyes, there was no reason for a young man whose fate had suddenly changed to be unhappy. But he was unhappy. Ada was born in a small tribe on the grassland. He was defeated in a conflict with Chanyu's uncle's tribe. Many young men in the tribe were recruited into the Dare to Die army. Because of his young age, he was taken as a slave by a noble in the Golden Palace. If nothing went wrong, he would not live past the age of 16 because life was too hard. Fortunately, it rained in spring. He was collecting cow dung on the grassland and was soaked. Maybe that was why he became stronger after the rain stopped. Chapter 1044. The meadow was 70 miles to the southwest of the city of Wei. Compared to the Xiangwan Plain, it was in the south, but the temperature was lower. The water and grass were not fertile. However, the Tang army was willing to pay a high price to camp here in the snow, ready to attack at any time. Why? Because the Tang army was running out of warhorses. They had to take back the meadow before next spring. That was their last hope. On the other side of the snow, the Tang camp was full of bonfires. Thick mattresses covered the backs of the warhorses. The Tang army valued the remaining warhorses more than their own lives. This only made Ada feel more contemptuous. He would never sympathize with the weak. Just like how he would never sympathize with the defeated general. Was the Tang army without warhorses still the same Tang army that used to dominate the world with cavalry? Was the man who was killed still the famous general? Huang was drinking in the Tang camp. He was a middle-aged general who was bare-chested. He was sweating profusely and his pale face was full of pain. In the summer, he was defeated by the young barbarian on the battlefield. Since then, he had never recovered from his injury. He disobeyed the order to drink because only the strong alcohol and the Nine River double distilled liquor could help him suppress his injury. He could stay awake and continue to lead the 2,000 cavalrymen. In the last war, the Tang Empire signed a peace treaty with the Divine Halls of West Hill. The heaviest price they paid was to cede the Xiangwan Plain to the Golden Tribe royal court. Princess Li Yu apologized to the Tang officials and people, and Prince Li Peiyan even committed suicide. Without the Xiangwan Plain, the Tang Empire lost the main source of warhorses. But in the following years, the small-scale battles at the border never stopped. Chanyu was cruel and vicious. He wanted to consume the warhorses of the Tang army. For this, he did not hesitate to let his cavalrymen pay twice or even thrice the price. The royal court could replenish the warhorses, but where could the Tang army replenish their warhorses? The number of warhorses of the northern battlefront army decreased rapidly as time went by and the battles never stopped. Now they were in a desperate situation. As a famous general in the Tang army, Hua Ying was extremely powerful in martial arts. In the northern battlefront army, he was only second to General Su Qi in both experience and ability. He had over 10,000 cavalrymen and 3,000 heavy cavalrymen under his command. But now, 2,432 men, with 2,432 warhorses, made up 2,432 cavalrymen, all the cavalrymen under his command. They were the last cavalrymen of the northern battlefront army. Hua Ying accepted the military order and brought all the cavalrymen here to confront the Golden Tribe's cavalry from summer to now. That was equivalent to throwing all their hopes into this battle, because the Tang army needed the grassland. They wanted to find hope. Of course, the Tang Empire would not have only these horses left. However, it was pointless to send horses from the south, because the number was not enough to change the current situation. What made the northern battlefront army even angrier was that the imperial court did not seem to have the same idea. Hua Ying stared at the wine bowl. There seemed to be a fire burning in his eyes. It was the academy that decided to cede the Xiangwan Plain to the Golden Tribe royal court, and it was Ning Ke who promised that he would solve the problem of the warhorses. However, years had passed, and the Tang army had been bleeding and dying on the grassland. He and his soldiers had been tortured like ghosts. Where were the horses? If you are lying to us, I will come back to Chang'an and ask you even if I die in the snow. He picked up the wine bowl and said to Ning Ke, looking to the south. At this moment, a warning came from outside the camp. At the same time, there was a fierce challenge. In the wind and snow, the voice was clear and fierce, echoing in the wilderness. Hua Ying looked back at the face in the wine bowl. It was a haggard face that was not as handsome as before. He suddenly smiled. With the help of his bodyguards, he carefully put on his armor and walked out of the tent. When he walked out of the tent, he was still in the camp. When he walked out again, the snowflakes fell on the armor, but they did not melt. Soon, the cracks were filled. The Tang army stood outside their own tents and looked at their commander in silence. Outside the camp, Hua Ying looked at the barbarian youth through the wind and snow. He said bitterly, "The general will definitely scold me." Of course, he remembered who the barbarian youth was. He was defeated by this inconspicuous youth on the grassland in the summer and had been injured ever since. No one knew when such a powerful cultivator appeared in the Golden Tribe royal court. If he was defeated by the infamous General Lebu, Hua Ying would understand. But he could not figure out where this youth came from and why he was so powerful. It was not until the rumor spread in the grassland that people realized that this young slave, Ada, was a gift from Haotian to the human world, just like Hengmu Liren from the divine halls of West Hill. He was a powerful cultivator bestowed by heaven. Hengmu Liren had an unimaginable position in the hearts of the followers of Haotian. If Ada did not live in the wilderness, his reputation would not be any weaker. After knowing the truth, Huaying realized that he had not lost unjustly. Haotian had truly abandoned the Tang Empire, just like how she had abandoned the desolate 1,000 years ago. He would not be afraid because of this, but his state of mind was still affected. He looked into the distance. On the horizon, there was a magnificent mountain that divided the entire land into two parts. It was the Min Mountain and the Tianqi Mountain. Is it terrible to be abandoned by Haotian? Huaying smiled. He reached his hand into the air and took the padao from the bodyguard. The cool sensation in his palm lifted his spirits. The barbarian youth was powerful and terrifying. Huaying knew that he was no match for him. If he fought, he would die. There was no reason for him to do so. When two armies confronted each other, there was no reason for the commander to fight alone. On the battlefield, the brave would never win. No one could say anything if he chose to avoid the fight. However, on his way out of the camp, he saw the soldiers' expressions and eyes. He saw the exhaustion and the terrible tiredness. He saw the old horses wrapped in blankets like sick people. He knew that the morale of the Northern Battlefront Army was at an all-time low. If he chose to fight, even if he lost and died, it would still be beneficial for him. The morning army might not win, but it could hold on until the situation changed. So he held the padao and walked to the other side of the snow. I will take your head and bury it with my tribe. Ada looked at Huaying and said emotionlessly, and one day, I will lead the warriors of the royal court to Chang'an and kill that man. Huaying patted the snow on his armor and said, you might be able to kill me, but I don't plan to let you go back alive. You won't live to see Chang'an. When he said this, the second most powerful warrior of the Northern Battlefront Army looked calm. He was not confident that he could defeat Haotian's gift to the human world, but he was confident that he could survive. When a man was not afraid of death, he would not be afraid of fate. His fingers on the hilt slowly closed, like iron. Snowflakes fell on it, but there was no sign of melting. Because his hand was just that cold. From his body to the long and thin hilt, and then to the heavy black blade, an extremely cold and sharp aura was slowly released, and then suddenly increased. The snowflakes in the air were disturbed by this aura and shot to all directions, making the sound of breaking the air like sharp arrows. Ada expressionlessly drew out the machete on his waist. It was a precious saber given to him by Chanyu. It was extremely sharp, as bright as his eyes at this moment. Just like before every important battle, the young man started to pray silently, asking Tingri to give him the power to defeat all the enemies. The snowflakes in the air seemed to hear his prayer. They timidly slowed down and floated in the air. The remaining snow on the field gradually melted, revealing the remaining grass underneath. The snow melted and the grass appeared, but it was not full of vitality. On the contrary, it gave people a very gloomy feeling. Ada looked at Huaying in front of him. His eyes were as bright as gemstones and as sharp as blades. There was a look of contempt and pity. Then he took a step forward. He only took one step forward and then stopped. He felt something was wrong. He looked up at the snowy sky and suddenly felt endless sadness in his heart. His slightly blue lips slightly moved, as if he was moaning, Tingri, when the tribe was defeated, he was still young and did not know how to be sad. Later, when he worked hard for the nobles in the royal court, he did not have the time to be sad. When he was collecting dung, he did not have the strength to be sad. Later, he became a great young warrior and was far away from the sadness. But at this moment, the sadness was so strong that it instantly occupied his body and mind. He seemed to see his own death in the next moment. Why was it like this? He stopped looking at the sky and looked to somewhere far away in the south. He felt that someone was watching him. Although he was thousands of miles away and could not hear any sound, he had a strong feeling that the person was talking to him. As long as he took a step forward, he would die. Ada's dark and childish face was full of unwillingness and anger. If that person could really shoot him from thousands of miles away, why didn't he do it in the summer? What made him most angry was that he felt the person's undisguised arrogance. And in front of this arrogance, even Tingri remained silent. And he began to fear. A neigh came from the wind and snow. No one knew where it came from, but it was full of arrogance. Ada looked at the Tang camp, holding the machete, not knowing if he would take that step forward. Thousands of miles away in the south, snow was falling on the city wall. Ning Ke stood on top of the city wall with his back against the whole Chang'an. He looked at the direction of the distant wilderness and the invisible battlefield. The dark and heavy iron bow was placed on the brick in front of him. The array pestle of the god-stunning array was held tightly in his hand. His sense of perception spread around. It was his order for the Northern Battlefront Army to kill all the captives of the Golden Tribe Royal Court. He knew it would put a lot of pressure on the Northern Battlefront Army, but he did not care. Because the way he talked to the world was not only the falling heads in the autumn rain, but also the box of iron arrows behind him. What was puzzling was that even with the help of Chang'an, he could not see the entire world no matter how far he could see. The wilderness thousands of miles away was just a blurry gray image in his sense of perception. As long as the powerhouses of the Golden Tribe Royal Court were not stupid enough to light themselves up, it would be meaningless. But he still looked to the north, as if he could see those lights at any time and then send them to the underworld or the divine kingdom with an iron arrow. Or was the fire in the Academy's hand all the time? I wish you all a happy weekend. I suddenly feel that labor is really a happy thing. Chapter 1045. The string of the iron bow in front of Ning Ke was loose, but the string of the giant bow was pulled taut. Just like what happened in the field of wind and snow, there were confrontations everywhere and battles could break out at any time. No one knew when the end of the world would come. Ada was a devout follower chosen by Sang Sang and the most outstanding young powerhouse of the Golden Tribe Royal Court. That was why he could feel Ning Ke's gaze on the city wall of Chang and from thousands of miles away. Hengmu Liren was in the same situation as him, but he could not feel it. Maybe because Ning Ke was not looking at him, or because there were too many gazes on him. The sacred sedan moved slowly on the streets of Yangzhou City. The beautiful sacred music kept ringing. The people of Qinghe Prefecture knelt on both sides of the street and looked at the sacred sedan with passion and humility. The passion and humility came from either piety or fear. Either way, it was what Hengmu wanted to see. That was all he wanted to see. Through the veil of the sacred sedan, Hengmu looked at the 7 masters of the clans of Qinghe Prefecture who knelt behind him. He thought about what they said when he summoned them. Hengmu smiled coldly and thought to himself, I don't need to worry about ants. No matter what you are thinking about, don't think about it anymore. The divine halls will help you think. What you need to do is to carry out the will of Haotian. This was the only thing Hengmu Liren said to the masters. Then he waved his hand indifferently and drove them away as if they were ants. Surrounded by dozens of divine priests and more papal cavalrymen of the West Hill, he walked out of Yangguan City. He came from the south with the mighty navy of South Jin and the powerful cavalrymen of the divine halls. The unstable Qinghe Prefecture was soon stabilized by his scornful attitude and killing intent. The young people who were hiding in the dark and were ready to cooperate with the Tangs were also killed or escaped by the deacons of the divine halls. Now his sacred sedan had left Yangzhou City and was heading to the north. Chang'an was in that direction. Chongming was also looking at Chang'an, but from a different direction. Chang'an was in the west from Qingjing City, where the sun set. He was no longer the crown prince Chongming who had been a hostage in Chang'an for 10 years. Instead, he was the high and mighty emperor of the Yan kingdom. However, his feelings for that city had not changed at all. There was no nostalgia, no lament, only incomparable hatred and fear. Behind him, the imperial palace of the Yan kingdom, which had been destroyed by the Tang army several years ago, was being rebuilt. With the war reparations from the Tang Empire, beautiful palaces were being rebuilt from the ruins. At this time, the capital of the Yan kingdom was in full swing. From the officials to the people, everyone was very proud. But he was still afraid. He had lived in Chang'an for many years. He knew how powerful the Tang Empire was. He knew that the Tangs would never forget their hatred. He knew what Li Yu was thinking. He also knew that if the Tang Empire really recovered, then the Yan Empire would not be able to resist their cavalry. The palace that had just been rebuilt behind him would become a ruin in a short period of time, and Li Yu would definitely give him unforgettable revenge. 3 years ago, the Tang Empire rebuilt the northeast border army. The general's mansion was still located in Tiang City. Compared to the past, there seemed to be no change. But Chongming knew that the newly built northeast border army only had one goal, and that was to destroy the Yan kingdom. Chongming did not dare to hope that the Yan kingdom could resist the Tang army with its weak national strength. He could only pin his hopes on the West Hill Divine Palace and his own brother. Because of this, he disregarded the opposition of his subjects and firmly carried out the orders of the West Hill Divine Palace. He searched the last of the food from his people's homes and kept sending it to the wilderness, to the nobles of the left king's palace who had been enemies with him for generations. Only when the cavalry of the left king's palace became stronger and stronger could they resist the desolate man's tribe further north. Only when the war broke out could they help the Yan kingdom fight against the Tang Empire. Chongming had thought that even if the East King's palace could not become a threat to the Tang Empire in a short period of time, it could at least ensure that the Yan kingdom could get rid of the shadow of the desolate man after he and his country had sacrificed so much. But who would have thought that the development of the situation would be far beyond his expectations? Why? Why could the desolate man's tribe survive until now, when they had been destroyed by the Divine Hall Coalition army a few years ago? And they even seemed to be slowly recovering their strength? This was a question that troubled the Yan kingdom's officials and made the Divine Hall extremely vigilant. As more information flowed back from the wilderness, they got the answer that was closest to the truth. There was a ghost. A ghost was floating in the wilderness. It was a small figure, but it was as terrifying as a devil. Neither the snow that filled the sky nor the yellow sand that devoured people could stop the ghost. The high priest of the left king's palace, who had the most powerful Dharma power, died tragically by the Crescent Sea 2 years ago. Then, several other priests died mysteriously. Until now, no priest dared to walk out of the palace. Every once in a while, there would be horrible news of a cavalry squad being destroyed or a powerhouse in the army becoming a pile of flesh and blood from the depths of the grassland. People kept dying on the grassland, including the powerhouses from the West Hill Divine Palace who went to rescue them, and the fallen commanders that Long Qing brought to the palace, could not get rid of the ghost's curse. Until now, there was still no living person who had seen the true face of the ghost. But the West Hill Divine Palace and the other countries had already confirmed who the ghost was. The ghost was a devil. Although she looked like a petite girl, she was undoubtedly the most terrifying and coldest devil in the world. She was not afraid to kill people. She killed people as if she was mowing grass. Her name was Yu Lian, or Lin Wu. She was Mr. Third of the Academy. She also had a more famous and more frightening identity. She was the current Grandmaster of the Devil's Doctrine, the most mysterious 23-year cicada cultivation in the cultivation world. Even after the spring wind and rain and the emergence of powerhouses in the cultivation world, no one believed that a cultivator could change the outcome of a war. It was not until Yu Lian began to kill people in the wilderness and she spent several years killing hundreds of powerhouses from Haotian Taoism that people gradually believed that such a thing really happened. This was a matter that chilled one's heart. Chongming was very disappointed, and so was his body. He subconsciously tightened his collar and looked away from Chang'an City to the depths of the wilderness. He found that it was even colder. The wind came from the wilderness. It was extremely cold, but there was a deep smell of blood in it. It was also snowing in the extreme west of the wilderness. The snow squeezed out from the lead like heavy clouds and fell to the ground, gradually covering the messy footprints. There were horse hooves and human footprints. There were so many footprints that it was impossible to see clearly. They spread forward in the wilderness, and the sound of stepping on the snow seemed to tear the clouds apart. In response to the summons of the Xiankong Temple, Chanyu of the Right Royal Palace ordered all tribes to form an expedition team of tens of thousands of cavalrymen. They braved the wind and snow to go to support the Buddhism's sublime beings who once sat above the clouds and rarely paid attention to the affairs of the world had now fallen to the extent that they needed the help of ordinary believers. It was a little sad to think about it. However, the tens of thousands of cavalrymen might die in the wind and snow on the way. Who would pity them? Some of the snowflakes fell on the ground of the wilderness, and some fell under the ground. There was still a world under the ground. It was a dark giant sinkhole. It was daytime, and the snow reflected the light. Logically, the world should be bright, or at least brighter than usual. However, the world at the bottom of the giant sinkhole was gloomier than usual. It was like the night, and the picture was very blurry. The reason was that everywhere in the wilderness of the underground world was burning. The highland barley fields that never froze because of the hot spring were ignited. The woods beside the streams were ignited. The water wheel outside the giant sinkhole was ignited. The tents of the nobles were ignited. An inconspicuous monk temple at the foot of the Prajna peak in the distance was gradually collapsing in the raging fire. A single spark could start a prairie fire. The serfs' uprising in the underground world that started a few years ago finally spread to all tribes and could no longer be extinguished. Beacon fires were everywhere in the Buddha kingdom. These fires brought blazing heat, burned gorgeous gold wares, and brought dirty black smoke, covering the sacred yellow temples among the peaks. The sounds of killing were everywhere in the wilderness. These cries from the deepest part of the soul could overwhelm the pious chanting of sutras and ignore the call of the morning bell. The beacon fires and the sounds of killing had not yet affected the giant peak transformed from the body of Buddha. The treasure mountain was unharmed, and the monks in the mountain had gradually become cold-hearted. That was why they ordered the right royal court to rush to help. The most important reason for this was that there was a ghost in the underground world. The ghost was the shadow of an iron sword, and it never stopped moving between the dirty and the sacred. Jun Mo was fighting. He had been injured, badly injured, but he never stopped waving the iron sword. He had been fighting for a long time without sleep and rest for several years. He would not stop until he tore apart the light of Buddha and led the people out of hell. The capital of the kingdom of Song was next to the sea. It was early winter, but it was still relatively warm. Snowflakes fell from the sky and would melt after being blown by the sea breeze. It was hard to attract people's attention. Just like the man who was preaching in front of the square, he wore a very ordinary divine robe and held a West Hill scripture. He was no different from an ordinary divine priest. However, the content of his preaching was obviously different from that of the divine priests of the West Hill Divine Palace. Yi Su looked at the dense crowd of believers and said, "Each of us has sinned. We have committed different sins, so we need to atone for our sins. If we want to atone for our sins, should we pin our hopes on the divine kingdom or ourselves? The great Haotian will naturally respond to our call. But what have you and I ever done? Don't say that you can't do anything. It's even more unimaginable that you can't change the world. The world is made up of countless of us. As long as we can change ourselves, we can actually change the world, and it's the most fundamental change. We are seeing a man change a war and a man change tens of thousands of years of injustice. So why can't we change the world and change ourselves?" Chapter 1046. The streets and alleys around the square of the capital of the Kingdom of Song were dead silent. Occasionally, heavy breathing could be heard, but it was not the breathing of humans, but the snorting of warhorses. Someone's preaching voice came from afar. Due to the distance, the voice sounded a bit erratic, as if it came from God. The complete meaning could not be heard, but some strange words such as woman, stone, sin, biscuit, and salt. Soon, they were blown away by the snorting of the warhorses and melted into the cold winter air, leaving no trace. Was there really no trace? Of course not. When the voice entered people's ears, it would leave traces in their hearts. The divine priests and deacons of the divine halls of West Hill hiding in the streets and alleys around the square, as well as the cavalrymen of the kingdom of Song holding sharp weapons, all had a strange look on their faces. The sound of breathing gradually became heavier. Hundreds of warhorses on standby, thousands of divine priests, deacons, and soldiers who were ready to attack at any time gradually converged into thunder in the quiet streets. According to the plan of the divine halls of West Hill, these heavily armed people would rush out of the streets and alleys and rush to the peaceful square. They would kill those traitors with their weapons and cut that preacher into pieces, setting off the first great climax of the destruction of the new stream. However, those divine priests, indifferent deacons, and pale-faced cavalrymen of the kingdom of Song actually did not understand why so many devout followers of Haotian would continue to listen to that blasphemer's preaching. Why were the followers of the new stream standing or sitting while listening to that preaching? Shouldn't they be kneeling? Why? Finally, the order came from the Taoist hall. With the heavy sound of the city gate closing, the capital of the kingdom of Song became a dead city. No one could leave. Those who dared to ignore the ban of the divine halls and change their faith or support, or even sympathize with the new stream would be arrested. As for the preachers of the new stream, those blasphemers, they would be killed immediately. The wind blowing from the coastline also gradually became colder, unable to blow the snowflakes away. The snow on the streets also stopped melting and gradually accumulated. With the orderly and terrifying footsteps, the city gradually turned into a clean and austere white. Everyone knew that the white snow would soon be dyed red with blood. The iron spears clashed against the armors, the horses breathed heavily, and the knights stared at them coldly. The smell of metal in the air gradually turned into the smell of blood. Countless cries of shock and fear were heard around the square. People knew that the divine halls would not allow the new stream to continue to spread, but they did not expect that the battle of faith would be so bloody from the very beginning. Those who sympathized with the new stream were driven to a corner by the deacons and cavalrymen of the divine halls of West Hill. The sound of iron rods hitting on flesh and blood could be heard everywhere, and the screams of the people could be heard everywhere. Naturally, most of all, the sound of crying was heard. Cries of fear and despair. Blood was spilling in the crowd. Cold rebukes were heard constantly. The iron spears and the blades kept shining, and then there was a brighter light. It was the sword light. In the crowd, more than 20 disciples of the sword Garrett of South Jin Kingdom drew their swords at the same time. They inherited the swords of Lu Bai and Lu Yiqing and cut the anger that descended on the human world with an indomitable momentum. The anger of the divine halls slightly subsided. However, with the continuous influx of cavalrymen and more powerful Taoism cultivators joining the battle, the scene became more and more chaotic. 3 commanders of the cavalrymen of divine halls led their subordinates and broke through the blockade of the disciples of the sword Garrett. They rushed into the depths of the square. They did not pay attention to the crying followers of the new stream, but only to the calm man on the platform. As long as they could kill the blasphemer, who would continue to believe in those absurd and evil theories. Looking at the bleeding people, the crying mothers holding their children in their arms, and the white-haired old men who were full of fear, Yi Su showed deep sorrow in his eyes. However, it was strange that he also felt pity and sorrow for the cavalrymen of divine halls who were rushing toward him. Chen Pippi walked onto the platform and was ready to leave with his senior brother. They had experienced such things many times during their escape from the South Jin Kingdom. Today seems to be the last day. Yi Su reached out and patted him on the shoulder, signaling him not to pack in a hurry. Then he looked up at the falling snow and said, "But, why did the headmaster do this?" During the escape, the carefree young man's temperament and the flesh on his body gradually disappeared. Chen Pippi said, "It's not the last until the last." His expression was so serious. His eyes were full of exhaustion, but there was no hesitation in the depths of exhaustion. Only this sentence showed that he was still the old Shinpipi. He believed in what was right and was willing to work hard for it. Most importantly, what made Ning Ke admire him the most was that he was still optimistic in the face of a desperate situation. It's different. Yi Su no longer looked at the sky. He looked at the increasing number of cavalrymen around the square and those powerful Haotian Taoism powerhouses. He said calmly, "Today's battle array is too big. These people can't stop us from leaving." Chen Pipi walked to him and looked at the approaching cavalry commanders and the murderous cavalrymen of divine halls. He said, "They are going to die soon." A few years ago, he was seriously injured and his ocean of qi and mountain of snow was locked by Sang Sang. He was already a useless man and was no match for any of the powerhouses of divine halls here today. But he said it calmly and matter-of-factly. Of course, it was the Academy's matter-of-factly. However, after saying this, his expression changed slightly. Because he saw the crowd gradually separate and a girl was slowly walking toward the wooden platform. She was Xiaoyu from the South Sea, his former fiancée. The once proud and powerful girl from the South Sea was still powerful, but her pride had completely sunk into her bones. She wore a divine robe and her aura was calm and cold. She was a powerhouse in the knowing destiny state. Those disciples of the sword Garrett could not stop her. No matter how hard the sword was, it would turn into scrap iron when it met her hands. The girl from the South Sea stopped when she was 200 feet away. She quietly watched the 3 cavalrymen of divine halls leading the unstoppable cavalrymen forward. She looked at Yi Su with a complicated expression. There was admiration, fear, hatred, and contempt in her eyes. She knew that one of the most outstanding traders in the history of Haotian Taoism was going to die soon. She looked at Chen Pipi with a complicated expression, but no one could tell what she was thinking. A cavalry commander rode to the front of the platform. His momentum was as fast as thunder. His blade broke through the air and fell. The talisman lines on the blades suddenly lit up and slashed down with endless qi of heaven and earth. If it had been in the past, the 2 men would have been able to take it easily or even ignore it. Yi Su and Chen Pipi were the most famous names in Haotian Taoism in the past 20 years. Neither Yi Hongyu nor Long Qin were qualified to be mentioned in the same breath as them. These 2 men were the real geniuses of Haotian Taoism. But now they had betrayed Haotian Taoism. Maybe it was for this reason that Haotian took away all their cultivation. That was what the cavalry commander thought. He had the cultivation of the upper see-through state. With the help of the talisman on his saber already had the power of the knowing destiny state. How could he not be able to kill 2 disabled people? At this moment, an iron cudgel flew from the sky like a hill. The cavalry commander's saber hit the hill. The warhorse couldn't stop at all, so his body hit the hill as well. The hill was made of iron and could not be moved. Anyone who tried to hit it would be turned into powder. The cavalry commander's blade turned into powder, his body turned into powder, and his warhorse also turned into powder. The powder with a metallic luster and the blood-red meat powder spread on the square with a bang. They mixed together and began to emit a strange luster. The noisy and chaotic battlefield suddenly became quiet at this moment. The cavalrymen of Divine Hall who were charging toward the platform pulled the reins desperately. The deacons who were fighting stopped in shock and looked toward the source of the sound. The dust gradually settled and the snow fell again. No matter what kind of powder it was, once it fell on the ground and mixed with the snow, it could not be seen anymore. The sight became clear and a petite figure appeared. The animal skin slightly shivered in the cold wind, just like the strands of hair on her cheeks. She pulled out the iron cudgel from the ground and looked at the girl from the South Sea in front of her. Tang Xiao Tang. Xiao Yu looked at the figure and said. There seemed to be flames burning between her lips and teeth. Then she looked at Chen Pipi with deep eyes full of sadness and anger. Tang Xiaotang looked at her and said seriously, if you dare to look at him like this again, I will definitely dig your eyes out. Xiaoyu's voice was extremely cold. Why? Tang Xiaotang said, I said a few years ago on Peach Mountain that he is my man. She said it as if it was a matter of course, just like what Chen Pippi had said before. Of course, it was still a matter of course for the academy. Although he came from Taoism and had the most noble and talented bloodline, and she came from the devil's doctrine and had the most evil and domineering bloodline, they were both from the academy after all. There was a dead silence on the square. Only the groans of the wounded and the cries of the dead could be heard. Looking at Chen Pippi and Tang Xiaotang standing together, the girl from the South Sea gradually calmed down and a faint self-deprecating expression appeared in her eyes. What's the point of dying together? The Abbey Dean is still waiting for you on Peach Mountain. She asked Chen Pippi. Chen Pippi explained seriously, Ning Ke once said that when the golden wind and the jade do meet, it is better than countless things in the world. I am the golden wind and she is the jade dew. Xiaoyu was slightly stunned and said sadly, it is indeed a good poem. Chen Pippi looked at her and said with a smile, actually, what he said next is more in line with what I want. He said that what he wants is to last forever, forever. So today can't be our last day. You should know whose will it is. My father? I don't think his will necessarily be carried out. This is Haotian's world. The Abbey Dean carries out Haotian's will. No one can change it. I am his son and senior brother is his disciple. We may not be able to change him, but I think there is someone in this world who can. Who? Ning Quebec, Chen Pippi said very seriously, that guy, even Haotian is not his match. How can my father be his match? Ning Ke is far away in Chang'an. He doesn't dare to leave the city, so he can't change what happened here today. Xiaoyu looked at him quietly and then raised her right hand. The wide sleeves of her divine robe slowly fell down, revealing her smooth and white arm. It was quite beautiful. Tang Xiaotang looked at Chen Pippi and said, don't look. Chen Pippi widened his eyes and said, I'm just a little shocked. Isn't her family always dark? Why are they so pale now? She said it when she shouldn't have said it because she was nervous. Xiaoyu raised her right arm and the cavalrymen of the divine halls of West Hill were ready to attack again. Chen Pippi said he believed that Ning Ke could change everything, but he didn't really believe it. He was just bragging out of habit and trying to save his friend's face. He looked at Yi Su and confirmed a fact. Senior brother, it seems that you have really achieved Taoism. Why do you say that? Because you can predict the future. What? You just said, this is the last day. Yi Su smiled and said, this is my last day. Chen Pippi said, then it must be mine. Judging from the situation, Tang Xiaotang was not afraid of Xiaoyu. The disciples of the Sword Garret were still fighting fiercely and should be able to protect them. But the two brothers knew that this was really the last day. Because this was the Abbey Dean's will. That man was the teacher he respected the most, his father. They knew very well how powerful and terrifying that man was. Even though he was a cripple with his ocean of qi and mountain of snow destroyed like the two of them, he could still overturn the world with a single thought. The Abbey Dean would never make a mistake except when facing the headmaster of the academy. There were definitely more people in the kingdom of Song today. There must be others who were preparing for the final harvest. The atmosphere was depressing at first, but then it became gloomy and horrible with Chen Pippi's silence and the moans of the wounded. Even the falling snow slowed down a bit. We ourselves are the path, the truth, and life. Yi Su looked at the confused and painful followers and said slowly, follow your own path and you will walk out of the dark valley and get the greatest joy. As he said this, the snow suddenly fell. A crack appeared in the snowy clouds above the capital of the Song Kingdom. Sunlight shone down and fell on him, gilding him with a layer of gold. The followers of the new stream were shocked speechless and then knelt down. The path, the truth, and life? There was a small courtyard between several inconspicuous buildings. Prince Long Qing stood in the courtyard with his hands clasped behind his back. He listened to the voices coming from outside the wall and seemed to be thinking. There were dozens of piles of firewood on the ground behind him. They were very dry and gave people a feeling of holiness. Not a single snowflake dared to fall on them. The flames of the firewood should be very high. He actually wrote it. What a surprise. Chapter 1047. The situation in the world was extremely tense. On the border of the Tang Empire, in the capital of the Song Empire, and at the bottom of the giant sinkhole, there were confrontations everywhere. Wars were on the verge of breaking out. Some had already started, while others had never stopped. The people in the world pinned their last hope on the envoys sent by the Tang Empire, hoping that they could reach an agreement with the divine halls of West Hill. The two envoys were just ordinary people who did not know how to cultivate, let alone powerful cultivators in the knowing destiny state. But at this moment, they were the most important people in the world. There were two kinds of people who loved peace. One was afraid of war, and the other was worried that they could not win, so they loved peace temporarily. Chu Yuxian and Qinshi belonged to this kind of people. They did not know that they were carrying the burden of the world, but they had the same idea as the world. They also wanted to reach an agreement with the divine halls of West Hill. However, the problem was that they could not see the two people they wanted and had to see. What made them even more terrified was that if the two people wanted to see each other, they would be able to even if they were in the divine halls of West Hill. But they could not see each other now, which seemed to be a bad sign. Did no one want to know what Ning Ke was going to say to them? Not being able to see each other was the source of all anxiety. Chu Yuxian and Qinshi were very anxious. They pondered in silence in the Revelation Institute, but they could not find a way to complete the task. Today, it was an ordinary divine priest in a brown robe who came to the Revelation Institute to meet them. Judging from his clothes and extravagance, this divine priest obviously had a very low status on the Peach Mountain. In fact, these days, the divine halls were getting colder and colder. After Chu Yuxian and Qinshi refused to talk to Zhao Nanhai, the divine priests who talked to them became lower and lower in rank. I'm just a nobody, so I'm not the one you want to see. The divine priest in a brown robe looked at the two and said, so who do you want to see? Judging from this question, the divine halls of West Hill were getting impatient or less curious. They even wanted to tear the window paper. At this point, it was meaningless to hide. It was better to have a try, even though it might be in vain. Chu Yuxian thought for a while, looked at the divine priest in a brown robe, and said seriously, we want to see Yi Hongyu very much. The brown-robed priest was not surprised and asked with a smile, why? When they were almost assassinated in Qinghe Prefecture, Chu Yuxian and Qinshi had already guessed what Gu Changel had guessed. Therefore, they were not surprised that Gu Changel was not surprised. The Taoist sect has no faith. To be precise, Mr. 13 only believes in the divine priest of judgment. Alright, that's a more reasonable explanation. The brown-robed cleric calmly said, I will report your thoughts. As for whether or not they will make arrangements, that is not something I am responsible for. After saying this, the people from the Divine Hall left the Revelation Institute. Just like this sentence, Chu Yuxian and Qinshi were irresponsibly forgotten again until dusk. Standing on the stone steps in front of the Revelation Institute, Qinshi looked at the fallen peach blossoms and imagined the three arrays hidden in the mountain path and peach bushes. He said, even if the Divine Hall can resist my army, everyone outside the array will be killed by Mr. First. Chu Yuxian asked, so you are puzzled by the Divine Hall's reaction? No, what I don't understand is the attitude of the Academy. Chen Seven shook his head and said, why is Ning Ke in such a hurry to negotiate with Taoism? What is he afraid of? The sun was setting, and the twilight was as red as blood. The two were silent with a heavy heart. At this moment, they finally received a reply from the Divine Hall, which was a congratulation. Tomorrow morning, the Hierarch Lord would summon them in person. The Divine Hall had arranged a very grand ceremony for this negotiation, and the Divine Priest of Judgment whom they wanted to meet would also be there. After the banquet, Chu Yuxian and Chen Seven returned to their room and looked at each other without saying a word, just like when they were looking at the peach blossoms in the twilight. Their hearts were still heavy. Tomorrow, the hierarch lord and thousands of divine priests and deacons would be in the divine hall. How could they talk to Yi Hongyu in private in front of so many people? Or, we don't have to talk in private. Chen 7 suddenly said. Chu Yuxian was confused and asked, what do you mean? After a moment of silence, Chen 7 said, we are only responsible for telling Ning Kei's words to her, no matter what the occasion is, as long as she can hear it. Hearing this, Chu Yuxian was silent for a long time, and his face turned pale. He murmured to himself, it's better not to see each other. Meeting in front of thousands of people and saying those words meant that he was courting death. He raised his head, looked at Chen Qi, and said with a sigh, you are really cruel. Ning Kei chose them to pass the message to the divine hall because of Chen Vii's plan and Chu Yuxian's unscrupulous behavior. But now it seemed that Chen 7 was better at cruel means. Just as Chu Yuxian said, he was cruel to both others and himself. Chen 7 said, if thousands of people heard those words, it might be more effective. Chu Yuxian's mood was a bit complicated. How could he be happy when he saw himself running on the road of death? But he had already been aware of this when he left Chang'an. So he was still calm even though his face was pale. Since we have to die after saying those words, maybe we should try to see that person first. Chu Yuxian walked to the window and said while looking at the cliff plateau halfway up the Peach Mountain, which looked like it was cut by a knife and axe, and at the inconspicuous stone houses in the darkness. Chen 7 walked to him and said with a frown, it's hard to get there. Chu Yuxian glanced at him and said bitterly, harder than death? It was a silent night. Both of them were silent and said goodbye to the past. So when they woke up in the morning, they were not in good spirits, especially Chu Yuxian, who had 2 very deep dark circles under his eyes, which looked both funny and depressing. It's a happy funeral. Chu Yuxian comforted himself. Led by the deacon of the Divine Hall, the two left the Revelation Institute and walked up the stone steps to the Peach Mountain. Peach blossoms were falling on the green hillside, and the snow that had fallen a few days ago had accumulated on it, which made it very beautiful. The bluestone steps were wet with dew, which was even more striking in the fragrant snow. It didn't take long before they saw the white Divine Hall on the top of the mountain. The morning light shone on it, and the holy aura was spreading. Chu Yuxian and Chen 7 looked at each other, and suddenly turned around and ran to somewhere on the cliff plateau. Stepping on the hard stone steps, they breathed as fast as the mountain wind. They ignored the deacon's panicked cries and the cavalrymen of the Divine Hall who were chasing after them. They swung their arms and opened their mouths, and ran desperately to the depth of the cliff plateau. It was really a mad dash that burned their lives. The two people, who were already prepared to die, burst forth with an unprecedented speed in this early morning. They were like 2 fleeing rabbits, passing through the grass, and even their figures became blurred with a whooshing sound. The Divine Hall's reaction was a little slow. The deacon and the cavalrymen didn't catch up until they reached the middle of the cliff plateau. But somehow, they didn't dare to take another step forward. Zhao Nanhai floated down from the top of the Peach Mountain. Looking at the 2 figures on the cliff plateau, he was expressionless, but he was in a strange mood. If the person in the stone house at the end of the cliff plateau didn't want to see him, the 2 Tangs wouldn't be able to run here even if they really did burn their lives. Why did he want to see him? Running to the stone houses at the end of the cliff plateau, Chu Yuxian and Chen 7 were panting and holding their waists. They almost couldn't stand up straight and felt that their lungs were about to explode. The Divine Hall didn't send anyone to chase them here, maybe because they were afraid, or for some other reasons. It was actually the result of their calculation, so it was not a surprise. The person in the stone house was really willing to see them, because even he wanted to know what Ning Kei was going to say. Chu Yuxian wiped the sweat off his forehead and thought proudly. With a light sound, the door of the stone house was pushed open, and a middle-aged priest came out. The middle-aged Taoist was wearing an ordinary Taoist robe, and his appearance was also very ordinary. There was nothing outstanding about his appearance or his aura. No matter how one looked at it, this Taoist should not and could not be an ordinary person, but he had been ordinary his whole life, which was very unusual. Chu Yuxian knew that this was not the person he was looking for, but he still looked extremely respectful. His hands were even trembling when he was tidying up his clothes. The middle-aged priest looked at him and said with a gentle smile, "You have to come here to see me. What do you want to say or do?" What did Chu Yuxian want to do? He knelt down to the middle-aged priest and the person in the stone house without hesitation and said humbly, "Chu Yuxian wants to hear a story, Taoist master." The middle-aged priest looked at him quietly, as if he didn't expect that Chu Yuxian would kneel down so naturally and decisively. He didn't even give himself a chance to stop him. Chu Yuxian looked calm and naturally knelt down. Ning Ke chose them to negotiate with Taoism because of Chen Vii's wisdom and bravery. As for Chu Yuxian, he had no bottom line. The middle-aged priest asked with a smile, "What story?" Since Chu Yuxian and Chen Seven could come to the stone house, it meant that they had permission. The person in the stone house wanted to hear it, whether it was a story or a fable. Chu Yuxian said respectfully, "The story happened in a world very similar to our world. In that world, there was a religion very similar to Taoism. The god of that religion was called God, who was omniscient and omnipotent. As the morning light faded, Chu Yuxian's mouth became drier and drier, and his voice became hoarse. Finally, he told the long story briefly. The middle-aged priest looked at him quietly, and then looked back at the stone house. Finally, he looked at the sky and clouds outside the cliff yard and said, "It is indeed a long story. The past and present of Christianity, the rise of Protestantism, and the retelling of history, no matter how simple it was bound to be long. 2,000 years of history were condensed into a story. Looking back at the end of the story, those bloody religious wars were indeed a bit ridiculous." Chu Yuxian bowed his head respectfully. The middle-aged priest thought about the beginning and ending of the story, the cooperation and disputes between the royal family and the believers, and the distribution of interests, and found the story more and more interesting. "I heard that Mr. 13 told many stories to Haotian. I don't know whether he has told this story or not. But at least it proves that he is a good storyteller," the middle-aged priest said. He knew that it was a story told by Ning Quebec. Then he stepped aside, and the door of the stone house appeared directly in front of Chu Yuxian and Qinchi. This story was just the beginning of the conversation. Ning Ke used such a grand story as a prelude, and even the middle-aged priest began to wonder what he was going to say. Looking at the closed door of the stone house, Chu Yuxian's face became paler and paler, and Qinchi also became short of breath. The man in the house had a very different status and meaning to the believers of Haotian in the world. Even they couldn't bear it. The middle-aged priest said, "What do you want to say? Just say it." Chu Yuxian became more humble, and his forehead seemed to be pressed into the ground of the cliff plateau. However, what he said next in a trembling voice was so rebellious. "God is dead, and so will Haotian. So, please think more about the things in the human world. The story of the religious reformation, whether it was told by Ning Ke or done by Yi Su, can't be written in tens of thousands of words. So I have to keep it simple. It's enough for you to convince yourselves that you have already seen the story. If you really want to read it, you can just read some related books. Jiang Yi is not a religious novel, so you have to make way for him. Besides, in the story of Jiang Yi, I have to rely on my energy, qi, and spirit to break through, because spiritual temperament is the most important to the end. Now I am not in good health and spirit, so I have to fight hard. Only the one with the knife can win. But I won't pay much attention to the structure of the sentences, because too much thinking will really affect the temperament. Even a person with a temperament like me can't do that." Chapter 1048. God was dead. Haotian would die too. The first sentence had once resounded like thunder in a certain world, shattering the dark sky and waking up countless ignorant people. The latter sentence should have had a similar effect, and it appeared in this world. Unfortunately, only 4 people heard it when it first appeared. The only thing that made it less regretful was that the person in the stone house heard it. The story Chu Yuxian told was Ning Kei's story. He didn't even know what the story was about, but he recited it very carefully according to Ning Kei's instructions, and didn't miss a word. After hearing the story, the middle-aged Taoist sighed with emotion. When he heard the last 2 sentences, his expression finally changed, but the stone house was still quiet. Chu Yuxian was prepared for this. He suppressed his uneasiness and continued to repeat Ning Kei's words, regardless of the other person's reaction. Those were the words Ning Kei wanted to say to the world and the person in the stone house. It's better to make progress together than to be destroyed together. There is no eternity in the world. Before Haotian appeared, there was no Haotian. Then why can't there be Haotian? Before Haotian, there was Taoism. Taoism wanted to protect the world, so there was Haotian. So the academy and Taoism should be the same. Chu Yuxian lowered his head as he spoke. His voice was getting lower and lower, because he vaguely understood what Ning Kei meant. He felt that Ning Kei's words were too shameless. As the repeater, he couldn't take it for granted like before. Sweat dripped from his forehead and fell on the ground in front of the stone house, but it didn't splash because it was too close to the house. Since we are the same, why do we have to fight to the death? For 1,000 years, the Abbey Dean had been the strongest in Haotian Taoism. However, Haotian had to die, so Haotian Taoism had to choose a new path. Such a great change had never happened in 1,000 years, and only a wise man like the Abbey Dean could handle it. Even if you have reservations, why can't you wait for 2 more years? Yi Su is your student. If he becomes a sage, you will be the sacred teacher. Chen Pipi is your son. If he becomes a sage, you will be the sacred father. When Taoism embarks on a new path, you will be the sacred teacher, sacred father and sacred lord. Why can't the 3 sages be one? It was very quiet on the plateau, except for the mountain wind and Chu Yuxian's voice. No one in the stone house agreed or disagreed, but just listened quietly. Chu Yuxian's voice was getting lower and lower, but his words were getting smoother and smoother. In the end, he even added his own words subconsciously. One is your most promising student, and the other is your biological son. Dao sect. Isn't it actually your family's business? We're all family, can't we just talk it out? After saying this, Sage Chu Yukai found that he had said too much. His face instantly became paler, but his sweat suddenly stopped. He felt that the wind in the cliff was a little cold. The next moment, he found that he was still alive, and he could not help but feel lucky. He decided that if he could go to the Divine Hall later, he would keep his mouth shut and let Qinshi do all the talking. After listening to Ning Kei's words, the stone house was still quiet. The middle-aged Taoist waved his hand and signaled Chu Yuxian and Qinshi to leave the plateau. The 2 had completed their task, so they did not dare to stay any longer. They retreated toward the mountain path like restless rabbits. With a squeak, the door of the stone house was opened again, and an ordinary wheelchair slowly rolled out. An old man was sitting in the wheelchair, covered with a gray blanket. The man in the wheelchair had lived for more than 1,000 years. According to the time, he was already old. But in fact, when he occasionally appeared in the human world, he did not look old. Until the battle in Chang'an, when he was sealed by Haotian in his snow mountain and ocean of Qi, he aged at a speed visible to the naked eye. His hair turned white, and his eyebrows became softer and softer. But no matter how old he was, even if he was now a cripple, as long as he was alive, he could hold Taoism tightly in his hand, and he was the most terrifying opponent of the academy. In Ning Kei's eyes, the Abbey Dean was far more important than the drunkard and the butcher. It was not because of the unimaginable divine sense that the Abbey Dean had shown, but because he was the Abbey Dean. The human world belonged to the headmaster of the academy and the headmaster of the academy. But the Abbey Dean had always been there. This fact itself proved many things. The middle-aged Taoist pushed the wheelchair to the edge of the cliff. The Abbey Dean quietly looked at the flowing clouds outside the cliff and the remaining snow in the green mountains. He said slowly, Ning Ke has been trapped in Chang'an for half a year. Many people think that he did nothing but repeat what he did last time. But in fact, he has been thinking, and this is what he has done. Yes, Ning Ke had been thinking. He had been thinking about how to solve the problems in the human world, and then solve the problems in the divine kingdom. Finally, he came to the conclusion that to solve the problems in the human world, he had to convince the Abbey Dean. Not to defeat or kill the Abbey Dean, but to convince him. He believed that the Abbey Dean could be convinced, because the Abbey Dean was not the drunkard or the butcher, nor was he a rotten monster tortured by the obsession of existence. In his eyes, the Abbey Dean was a man who had broken away from the vulgar taste, a man with high aesthetic standards, and a man with a strong heart. In other words, he thought that the Abbey Dean was very similar to the headmaster, which was a great compliment. Through the teachings of the headmaster of the academy, Ning Ke had lived in the Buddhist chessboard with Sang Sang for countless years, and had a much deeper understanding of faith than before. He knew the origin of Taoism and Haotian. Therefore, he was sure that the Abbey Dean was not one of those foolish women who cried bitterly at the sight of the divine light. The Abbey Dean's piety was not in Haotian, but in his belief. That belief was the biggest secret of Taoism since ancient times. Haotian guarded the world. The world was the root, and it was what Taoism wanted to protect. Whether it was the gambler who founded Taoism or the Abbey Dean who ruled Taoism, Haotian did not have the innate divinity in their hearts. Therefore, Ning Ke tried his best to tell the Abbey Dean the story and the last two sentences. He knew that the Abbey Dean did not need him to remind him, but he wanted to remind him. When God died, Haotian could also die. In that world, there was the new stream, and Taoism could also embark on a new path. The old world waved goodbye, and the new world appeared. As long as Taoism took the initiative to embrace this trend, it could still have its own position in the new world. Taoism could still protect the world, but in a different way. Ning Ke wanted to remind him that the world itself was much more important than Haotian. This was not only the Academy's view, but also the most essential belief of Taoism. Then why couldn't the Academy and Taoism be on the same path? Ning Ke chose the Abbey Dean to talk to because he knew that the Abbey Dean could understand him. He knew that the Abbey Dean was wise enough, and the Abbey Dean was a truly great man. Only a truly great man could make such a great decision. The headmaster of the academy is a great man to have such a student. The Abbey Dean said calmly, Ning Ke can see through the foundation of Taoism and see through my belief. He is also a great man. The middle-aged priest was moved, because the Abbey Dean spoke highly of Ning Ke, and also because the Abbey Dean had vaguely admitted his true thoughts. The Abbey Dean looked out of the cliff and remained silent for a long time. The middle-aged priest's hands trembled slightly on the wheelchair. Even he felt extremely nervous at this moment, because what was going to happen next would definitely change the fate of the entire human world, and even the Haotian divine kingdom. There were many clouds outside the cliff. The white clouds floated everywhere like the waves on the water. They seemed to come and go at will, but they were actually shaped by the wind and attracted by the earth. The Abbey Dean looked at the clouds and said calmly, unfortunately, he still doesn't understand himself. Chu Yuxian didn't understand either. Though he was a storyteller, he was no different from a parrot. He didn't know who God was, what the crusade was, what was the relationship between that religion and Taoism, and what was Ning Ke trying to say to the Abbey Dean. How could Haotian die? After leaving the cliff plateau, Zhao Nanhai and dozens of cavalrymen of the divine halls were waiting for them. The situation was a bit tense, but Chu Yuxian was not afraid. He pointed at the small stone houses and said, I can get there, so it's not a mistake. I can come back alive, so you can't kill me. Zhao Nanhai looked at the small stone houses in silence. No one knew what he was thinking, but he did nothing in the end. He led Chu Yuxian and Qinshi to the top of the peak. The White Taoist Temple at the top of the Peach Mountain was the main hall of the Divine Halls of West Hill, the top building of Haotian Taoism in the human world, and also the place for the negotiation. The floor of the divine hall was paved with smooth stone bricks, like a bronze mirror, reflecting the sunlight coming in from all directions. It also looked like it was paved with gold. The inside of the hall was spacious, and the walls were engraved with religious murals. Gems were inlaid everywhere, as if the wealth of the whole world was gathered here, and it was extremely solemn and sacred. Thousands of divine priests and deacons stood in the divine hall in a neat line. No one spoke, and no sound could be heard. It was like a silent ocean. Chu Yuxian and Qinshi walked in the crowd, as if they were walking in the ocean. They always felt that there was a terrifying storm hidden in the silent crowd. After walking for a long time, they finally arrived in front of the high platform in the deepest part of the divine temple. On the platform, there was a light screen that looked like a waterfall. On the screen, there was an extremely tall, godlike figure. That figure's voice was like thunder, and it had a terrifying divine might. The tall figure used to be called the most mysterious person in the cultivation world, together with the Devil's Doctrine's 23-year cicada cultivation. However, after that battle, he was seriously injured by Yu Lian, and could no longer maintain his image. During the Right to Light, he was shot by Ning Ke, which made his position in the hearts of Haotian's believers in the world plummet. But he was, after all, the hierarch of the divine halls of West Hill, a peerless powerhouse who had surpassed the 5 states and successfully reached the Tianqi state. He was also recognized by the Abbey Dean as the leader of Haotian Taoism. Chu Yuxian and Qinshi maintained enough respect for the tall figure. They were meticulous in saluting and worshipping, and there was no fault to be found. But to be honest, even the slowest divine priest could tell that their attention was not on the hierarch behind the light curtain, but on the inconspicuous chair under the high platform. The chair was not carved from a whole piece of South Sea black jade. But because the woman was sitting in the chair quietly, the ordinary chair became the seat of heavenly black jade. She sat there with her eyes closed, and the world around her became a sea of blood. Because she was wearing a blood-red robe, she had the most beautiful and coldest face in the world. She was the inviolable great divine priest of judgment, and she was the real powerhouse of Haotian Taoism, Yi Hongyu. Yi Hongyu, the great divine priest of judgment, was the one Ning Ke wanted to talk to, and also the one Chu Yuxian and Qinshi wanted to meet. Today, they finally met. Chu Yuxian and Qinshi were in a strange silence. As they said last night, it was better not to see her. In front of thousands of divine priests and deacons, as well as the hierarch of the divine halls of West Hill, how could they avoid Yi Hongyu's gaze and let her hear Ning Ke's words? The ceremony in the divine hall had entered the procedure of praising. There was not much time left for Chu Yuxian and Qinshi. Whether the negotiation between the Tang Empire and the divine hall could continue or not, they would leave Peach Mountain soon, and that sentence was still hidden in their hearts. Chu Yuxian looked at Qinshi and thought of the method he mentioned last night. He felt his lips and tongue were dry, and he murmured, "Are we really going to do this?" Qinshi stared at Yi Hongyu and said, "What else can we do?" Chu Yuxian was silent for a while, and finally summoned up the courage to take 2 steps forward with difficulty, attracting the attention of the people in the hall. Then he coughed and interrupted a red-robed divine priest. "We have something to talk about." Because of nervousness, he looked at the people in the divine hall and said in a hoarse voice, "We have come with the will of peace. Shouldn't you let us talk?" Thousands of divine priests and deacons in the hall looked at him expressionlessly. Their red, purple, and black robes were like the sea of different colors, silently but blowing on his face, and became a kind of pressure that made Chu Yuxian feel difficult to breathe. At the same time, Qinshi also took a step forward. The atmosphere in the hall became even more tense and depressing. But Qinshi seemed to feel nothing. He looked at the ordinary chair in the distance and the sea of blood, and said calmly and firmly, "Would you like to listen?" The negotiation was a joke. If there was a negotiation, it would have been finished in front of the stone house on the cliff plateau. She closed her eyes and seemed a little tired. Even though she heard the question, she still did not open her eyes. Qinshi stared at her and said in a hoarse voice, "Everyone knows." Ning Ke wants to talk to the world. In fact, he just wants to talk to you. Yes, everyone knew that if Ning Ke wanted to talk to someone, the great divine priest of judgment would be one of them. The hierarch knew it, Zhao Nanhai knew it, the divine priests and deacons in the divine halls of West Hill, and even the servants knew it. That was why Xiong Chumo wanted the two Tangs to die in Qinghe Prefecture. That was why they could not meet Yi Hongyu on Peach Mountain. At this moment, in front of thousands of divine priests and deacons, in front of countless powerhouses, they finally saw Yi Hongyu. They wanted to talk to her, even if they would die in the next moment. Even if they had to die, they wanted her to hear what he had to say. Chapter 1049. Ning Ke wanted to talk to the world and change the trend of the world. Therefore, Yi Hongyu must be one of the people he talked to. This was something that many people did not say out loud. Because the current great divine priest of judgment had known Ning Ke when she was still the Tao addict. The two of them used to be sworn enemies, but in the end, they did not live and die together. The two of them had fought and fought side by side. She had lived by the Yanming Lake in Chang'an for a long time, and they had also bathed in blood in the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, and they had died together. In the eyes of the Divine Hall, even if the great divine priest of judgment were to marry Ning Ke, it would not be surprising. As for how shocking it would be, it was not within the scope of the two people's considerations. After all, they were people who shocked the world and did things that shocked the world. What made Haotian Taoism even more uneasy was that the new stream that the divine halls swore to destroy was founded by Yi Su, and she was his sister. Therefore, Yi Hongyu was the most natural ally of the academy and the best target to incite, no matter from the perspective of intimacy or other aspects. Thousands of divine priests and deacons in the hall looked at Qinshi, who was standing at the forefront, and guessed what this Tang would say, or rather, what Ning Ke would say. Their expressions were very complicated. There were a lot of uneasiness, shock, confusion, and worry. Did the academy really want to incite the great divine priest of judgment? Did what Ning Ke was going to say really have something to do with this? However, at this moment, thousands of powerful Haotian Taoism cultivators were gathered in the hall. How could he say those rebellious words? How could the great divine priest of judgment respond? Thinking of this, people felt a little relieved. As the person involved, Yi Hongyu's expression did not change at all. Her beautiful eyebrows and eyes were as cold as snow. She did not even open her eyes. "What does that guy want to say?" she asked with her eyes closed, looking very casual. It was obviously a very important matter, faintly revealing an extremely terrifying feeling, but when her red lips slightly opened, it became a small matter, a small greeting. People in the hall looked at Qinshi again and wanted to know what he was going to say. Being stared at by thousands of indifferent eyes, Qinshi was very nervous. It was not only because of the thousands of eyes, but also because what he was going to say next might become his epitaph. Ning Ke said. At this point, Qinshi paused, and Chu Yuxian almost fainted. Chen Seven took a deep breath and looked at Yi Hongyu. He said the second half of the sentence in a low voice. "He's waiting for you in Chang'an." Why would I wait for you in Chang'an? Although he could marry her, he naturally wouldn't wait for her to marry him. Instead, he would wait for her to surrender or return. The solemn and sacred Taoist temple was already extremely quiet, but now it became even more silent. Only that sentence was still floating in the golden light, drifting into everyone's ears. Was he trying to persuade the great divine priest of judgment to betray the Tao sect? Did Ning Ke really dare to think like that? Did the Tangs really dare to say that in the divine hall? Were they all crazy? Countless pairs of eyes fell on Qinshi. Their eyes were filled with shock and confusion. After saying this, Qinshi felt a little pain in his throat, as if he had lost all the water in an instant. However, all the fear from before had disappeared along with the water. If he says it's a broken pot, then it's broken. Hesitation doesn't suit your personality. He asked you why you didn't betray him? When are you planning to betray us? He said that no matter when you betray him, he will always be waiting for you in Chang'an. At this moment, the divine priests and deacons, who were still in a trance and thought that they had misheard, finally completely understood Ning Kei's intention. In the most sacred Taoist temple at the top of Peach Mountain, in front of thousands of the most devout followers of Haotian, Ning Kei actually persuaded the great divine priest of judgment to betray him. Was this instigation? Was there such a ridiculous and almost childish instigation in the world? Or was this the Academy's provocation? But who would believe it? No. How could the Academy do such a ridiculous thing? The divine priests and deacons, who had an absurd expression on their faces, suddenly thought of a terrifying inference. Ning Kei wanted to say these words in front of thousands of people. As long as the world could hear it, he would have achieved his goal. This was not a conspiracy, nor was it an overt plot. It was not a plot at all. It was a sharp iron knife pointing at the most fundamental contradiction of the Divine Hall. The Divine Hall could not solve the problem of the new stream, so they could not convince themselves to continue to trust Yi Hongyu and the Divine Hall of Judgment led by her. What Ning Kei did was to peel off the surface, but he did it so cruelly that everyone in the hall felt a burst of pain. Pain brought anger. The sea of people in the Divine Hall rippled. The divine priests and deacons angrily approached Qinshi and Chu Yuxian like a black tide. When the psyche of thousands of divine priests and deacons gathered together, it was unimaginably horrible. Qinshi spat out blood and his face turned pale. At this moment, Yi Hongyu finally opened her eyes. Just as Qinshi was about to collapse, her cold gaze made him feel a little more relaxed, and he breathed in some fresh air. A destructive aura rose from the depths of the Divine Hall like a hurricane on the ocean. It came to Chu Yuxian and Qinshi and hit them in the face. At this moment, Yi Hongyu stood up and stood in the middle of the aura. The atmosphere in the Divine Hall was stifled, becoming abnormally tense. Hundreds of deacons of the judicial department in black emerged from the sea of people and stood in front of their angry colleagues like black bubbles. A thunderous voice resounded in the hall, "Apostate shall die." It was the voice of the Hierarch Lord, calm and full of unstoppable divine power. Yi Hongyu said calmly, "Since you have started, why don't you finish it? It's always the most painful thing to hear a story halfway. What's the harm in listening to it?" Thousands of divine priests and deacons in the hall looked at each other and did not know what to do. Would Taoism really split today just because of what Ning Kei said from thousands of miles away? The Hierarch Lord said slowly, "It's a blasphemy to hear such words. I just want to hear what else Ning Kei has to say. As for blasphemy, I will kill them after I hear it. Then there will be no blasphemy." Yi Hongyu said calmly as an explanation. The Hierarch Lord's silence was a kind of acceptance. Yi Hongyu looked at Qinshi and said calmly, "Go on." Qinshi felt a little strange when he thought of what Ning Kei said. But he did not dare to hide anything at this moment, so he repeated it honestly. He said, "It's good to be accompanied by youth." He said, "It makes me crazy to read all the poems and books." He said, "I want to see you so much that I'm going crazy. Have a good weekend. I love this chapter." Mountie 1118. Chapter 1050. My good friend, Hoodlum, finally came to our Jianghu. His Legend of the Ranger of the Three Kingdoms was also a classic of the Three Kingdoms. The plot and characters were very unique. How could it be wrong to write the heroine as a woman? I believe many of my old comrades still remember it. I sincerely recommend my brothers and sisters to have a taste of it. The title of his new book is The Battle of the Three Kingdoms. The book number is 3032615. He said that you have to break the jar. It's not your character to hesitate. He asked you why you didn't betray him. When are you going to betray him? He said that no matter when you betray him, he will always be waiting for you in Chang'an. He said, "It's good to be accompanied by youth." He said, "It's good to read all the poems." He said, I want to see you so much that I'm going crazy. It was quiet in the Taoist temple as if it was the deep winter. Yes, it was the deep winter outside the temple. But how could the winter enter the temple? Only Chen Vii's voice was floating around. The first 3 sentences were still floating in the air, but the last 3 sentences came again. It was like the waves behind pushing the waves in front, tearing the quiet space apart and hitting the stone wall full of religious murals. The murals smashed into pieces, but thousands of divine priests and deacons in the temple were covered with snow and froth. Ning Kei's words were as stiff as iron and frivolous. It was a matter of course for them to be together. It was the Academy's matter of course. I am waiting for you in Chang'an, and you will come. This was the only logical result, and it was bound to happen. Taoism worshipped Haotian, and the new stream was seriously shaking the foundation of Haotian. No matter what Yi Hongyu did, she could not solve the fundamental conflict between them. Therefore, the new stream must be destroyed, and Yi Su must die. Since Yi Su would die, she would betray him. She would betray Taoism sooner or later. It was better to betray sooner than later, because the betrayal earlier could give Yi Su and the new stream a chance of survival. In fact, many people knew this, including Yi Hongyu herself. However, no one in Taoism thought about it, as if the crack on the sun did not exist if they did not look at it. At this moment, Ning Kei said a few rude words. Chen 7 and Chu Yuxian perfectly understood his intention and used a more rude way to make his words resound in the divine halls of West Hill at the cost of their lives. These words were like a rude man tearing off the clothes of a weak woman. He tore off the sacred blood-colored robe covering her body of faith, and exposed the naked truth to the hot divine light of Haotian. He had pointed out the main point of the question and even answered it. Therefore, even if the thousands of people in the divine hall wanted to pretend that they didn't see it, they couldn't do it. These words of Taoism would master. Taoism of Taoism, Feng Taoism Shi, and Feng School. The hierarch stood behind the curtain of light. His tall figure did not tremble at all, but the curtain of light suddenly trembled and rippled with circles of light. Looking at the shaking curtain of light, Chu Yuxian's mind was also shaken. He and Chen 7 made the decision, so they were no longer afraid of death, but it did not feel good to know that they were doomed. Everyone looked at Yi Hongyu, waiting for her to make a decision. They were waiting for the first time in the history of the divine halls of West Hill to betray the great divine priest of judgment, and for the rupture of Taoism. People had mixed feelings. Some were relieved, some were anxious and scared, and some were curious. Obviously, the crowd was in an uproar, but there was no noise. She was the center of attention, but it seemed that she could not feel those eyes. She was still standing there quietly. What was Yi Hongyu thinking at this time? Was it good to have a young companion? She thought of many years ago, outside the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine in the depths of the wilderness. She thought of the iron chain that passed through the clouds and connected the land of death with the reality. She thought of the basket under the iron chain, and the young people inside and outside the basket. She squinted and looked at the distant sky outside the hall. Under the sky was the kingdom of song. Tang Xiaotang should be there, right beside her brother. Long Qing had disappeared for so many days, so he should be there too. She was in charge of the divine hall of judgment. Although she could not control Long Qing, Hengmu, and the others, she could find their whereabouts. However, the distance between the two places was too far. It would be too late for her to rescue them. Who was in the basket under the iron chain when it passed through the clouds and mist? Besides Ning Kei, there was Mo Shanshan. Where was the former calligraphy addict and now the queen of the great river kingdom? Yi Hongyu smiled. She seemed to have thought of something, but it was meaningful. The young people in the past had all become great people. She was the youngest great divine priest of judgment in the history of the divine halls of West Hill. Ning Kei had become the spokesperson of the Academy and the Tang Empire. And now he was attacking her. Yes, she was very clear that the 6 sentences that seemed to be floating in the hall were the dark iron cutlass in Ning Kei's hand. The first 3 sentences and the last 3 sentences were all shocking. I always thought that Ning Ke was the shame of the academy. Yi Hongyu finally spoke, breaking the oppressive and painful silence in the divine hall. Obviously, what she said was beyond everyone's expectation. That's because he's too narrow-minded. He likes to target specific people and specific things with his methods. Of course, his methods are indeed good. If it were someone else who was pushed into this position by him, they would probably just take advantage of the situation and rebel. The hall was extremely quiet. She stopped smiling and said coldly, "But I am not someone else. I am Yi Hongyu." Does he expect to break my heart with these words? I hate those stupid literati the most. I feel disgusted by these words. How can I listen to them? If Qing Shan doesn't come to me, I will come to Qing Shan. No, I have never been such a person. If he doesn't come to me, why should I come to him? Tell him to give up. She looked at Chen Qi and said expressionlessly, "Should he just kill him or save him?" Chen Qi did not understand. He did not understand why he would fail. Yi Hongyu looked so beautiful and calm, as if she did not hear Ning Ke's words and did not care about Yi Su's life or death in the kingdom of song. Why? Chen Qi stared at her perfect face seriously. His face gradually turned pale and his eyes seemed to be burning with wildfire. He turned all his soul into courage. He did not admit defeat because Ning Ke had another sentence. Before they left Chang'an, Ning Ke had seriously reminded them not to tell him that unless they were in a desperate situation or at the last moment, they should never tell him that. Chen Qi did not know the meaning of that sentence. But from Ning Ke's attitude, he knew that it must be the key to victory. So why should he not use it? Ning Ke said one last sentence. Chen Qi stared at Yi Hongyu's eyes and said. Yi Hongyu looked indifferent. That person is Xiong Chimo. Chen Qi's voice was a little hoarse. It was not because of dehydration, but because he was nervous. He used too much force and his throat began to bleed. The sentence was without a head or tail. Thousands of divine priests and deacons in the hall could not understand what it meant. That person was Xiong Chimo. Who was she? Who was Xiong Chimo? Chen Qi did not understand it, so did the others. In the divine hall, among the crowd, only 2 people understood the meaning of this sentence. Because they were the 2 people involved in that incident. The light curtain stopped shaking and the hierarch's figure gradually became deep. Yi Hongyu stood in front of the light curtain and her expression gradually became serious. Chapter 1051. That person was Xiong Chimo. Who was that person? Who was Xiong Chimo? At this time, thousands of divine priests and deacons in the hall were thinking about the same question. They had no answer, but they knew that since it was Ning Ke's last sentence, it must be very important. So they looked at Yi Hongyu with more and more solemn eyes, just like her expression. Only a few people had heard of the name Xiong Chimo. Only a few people knew that it was the hierarch's secular name, which made them even more nervous. The waterfall-like curtain of light in front of the high platform stopped flowing. It was as solemn as a silent wall. The tall figure behind the wall became more and more imposing. A strong aura spread out in all directions. There was no killing intent, only a divine majesty. This was because the situation had reached the most critical moment. The tall figure had to crush all doubts and pressure from her. Yi Hongyu stood in front of the light curtain. Compared to the light curtain and the figure behind it, she seemed very small, but she stood steadily, as if she would not be swallowed no matter what happened behind her. Time passed slowly but unquestionably, just like the wind blowing from the cliffs outside the hall. Although it was gentle, it was bitterly cold and unquestionably lowered the temperature. The next moment would be the battle between the hierarch and the great divine priest of judgment. Once again, out of everyone's expectation, Yi Hongyu's expression gradually became calm. She was no longer gloomy or solemn, but just as a clear stream under a plum tree. Without any expression, she slowly sat back in the chair. That blood-red divine robe of judgment floated up with her movements and then fell down. Like a red flower, it retracted back to the branch and no longer made a sound. It seemed that nothing had happened. It seemed that she did not hear a word. She just sat in the chair quietly. Only the closest subordinates of the divine hall of judgment and those red-robed divine priests with high states could see the impatience and tiredness in her eyes. She raised her right arm and pointed at Qinqi and Chu Yuxian from afar. Her slender fingers seemed to be dripping dew, but she did not conceal her indifference at all. The black deacons of the divine hall of judgment stepped forward without hesitation, knocked Qinqi and Chu Yuxian down, locked them up with inhibition, and dragged them out of the hall. Qinqi and Chu Yuxian would be taken to the U prison, where they might never see the light of day again, but at least they would not die immediately. Naturally, many people in the hall had different opinions about this decision, but at this moment, no one dared to question her decision. Even the tall figure behind the light curtain remained silent. Then she took a look. With just a glance, the thousands of divine priests and deacons in the hall all felt that the divine priest of judgment was looking at them. They were all shocked by the coldness and power in that gaze. The sea of red, black, and brown divine robes could be calm or berserk, but before her eyes, they all scattered in all directions, flowing towards the low-lying areas. Not even the sound of footsteps could be heard. In a very short period of time, thousands of priests and deacons quietly withdrew from the hall, leaving the world to the two of them. Yi Hongyu and the hierarch lord behind the light screen. I'm curious, how did the academy find out? Yi Hongyu sat on the chair and said expressionlessly. She did not turn around to look at the screen of light. Behind the light screen, the hierarch lord squinted and looked at her back. No one knew what he was thinking. Yi Hongyu did not wait for his answer and said coldly, there is only one possibility that the academy knows about this, and that is Yu Lian. Yu Lian was the third sister of the academy, and also the current Grand Master of the Devil's Doctrine, 23-year cicada cultivation. If Ning Ke and Long Qin were considered lifelong enemies by the cultivation world, then decades ago, Yu Lian and Xiong Chimo were the real lifelong enemies. The one who knew you best was not your friend, but your enemy. Xiong Chimo finally said, since you heard that sentence, you never doubted it. Why? Yi Hongyu sat on the chair and looked at the winter sky outside the hall expressionlessly. She said, I always knew it was you, but I didn't expect others to know it too. After a long silence, Xiong Chimo asked, when did you know? Yi Hongyu rubbed her eyebrows tiredly and said, during the right to light, your sedan was shot by Ning Quebec. I knew it was you the moment I saw you. Xiong Chimo smiled weirdly and said, I didn't expect you to be so patient. Yi Hongyu said, you've been in pain ever since you were defeated by Yu Lian. Even if Haoqian cured you, he couldn't cure your Taoist heart. Since you're going to die in my hands, why not let you suffer for a few more years? Why should I be in a hurry? Looking at her back in silence, Xiong Chimo suddenly realized that it was hard for him to look at her back like he did in the past years, reminiscing her figure many years ago. She was very powerful now, so powerful that she could threaten him. How can you be sure it was Yu Lian? No one should know about it. It's not because she's your enemy. In her eyes, you're not qualified to be her opponent. It's because she's the 23-year cicada cultivation and the Grand Master of the Devil's Doctrine. The Devil's Doctrine has always been the best at scheming. I won't be surprised no matter how much she knows. Just because of this, you're sure she knows? And because she didn't kill you even though she injured you badly in the back of the mountain of the academy. Yi Hongyu stood up slowly and said, I couldn't figure out why she let you go. Ning Ke couldn't figure it out either. Now the answer finally appears. She still didn't turn around and looked at the winter sky outside the hall. Because she knew I would kill you. So she kept you alive to give me a reason to betray the sect. She used you, a good-for-nothing, to split Taoism, she said calmly. It's indeed the 23-year cicada cultivation. Xiong Chimo said after a long silence, and then? There was no then. There was no terrifying divine light spreading, no shrill Taoist swords dancing, no war, no revenge, no humiliation, and not even a trace of hatred. Yi Hongyu walked out of the hall. Her bloody gown of judgment swayed in the cold wind like flowers blooming on the branches, overshadowing all the divine lights on the wall. Behind the light curtain, Xiong Chimo's eyes narrowed into two lines. One of his eyes was stained with blood as if it would never recover. It looked filthy and evil. Gradually, a dim light accumulated in the deepest part of his eyes. It was shock, anger, and fear. He didn't realize until today that he could escape from Yu Lian's hands because it was a trap set up by Yu Lian, not because he was strong enough. In Yi Hongyu's words, in Yu Lian's eyes, he was never qualified to be her opponent. His life or death was not important to her. She let him live because she knew from the beginning that he would become the cause of chaos, or rather, the sinner of Haotian Taoism. But Yu Lian didn't expect that Yi Hongyu didn't do anything. Xiong Chimo also couldn't understand why she didn't do anything after the right to light a few years ago. Chapter 1052. After leaving the White Divine Hall on the peak, Yi Hongyu walked down the mountain path. Clouds gathered around her skirt, and her mind became clear. When she arrived at the cliff plateau, she was as calm as still water. Looking at the small stone houses deep in the cliff plateau, her eyes were as calm as water. The next moment, her Taoist heart became as hard as iron. The cliff plateau and the small stone houses were very meaningful to her. They were not just mementos. When she was at the front gate of the Devil's Doctrine, she forcefully lowered her state to escape from Lotus. Her Taoist heart and cultivation were greatly damaged. When she returned to the Peach Mountain, many people thought that she would never be able to recover. She was despised, and the hierarch even wanted her to marry Luo Kadi. She locked herself in the small stone house and continued her cultivation in silence. She knew that she could overcome all the obstacles. Then she received a letter from the Sword Garret. She became powerful again. She killed the previous great divine priest of judgment and became the youngest great divine priest in the history of the West Hill Divine Palace. She began to write her own legend. After that day, Luo Kadi was no longer a problem. Even the hierarch was no longer a problem. There was no problem in the human world that could baffle her. Including what Ning Ke said today and the question given by the academy, it was still not a problem for her. She came to the stone house not to ask the person in the house to relieve her confusion and pain, but to receive the reward she deserved for answering the question. She did not betray Haotian Taoism, nor did she attack the hierarch. She did not lead the divine hall of judgment to tear Haotian Taoism apart. She ignored Ning Ke's invitation and did not take a step closer to the academy. She still stayed on the Peach Mountain and put herself in danger. Now, she was alone, and she was taking a strange risk. She had the right to ask the person inside the stone house for anything she wanted. Dusk fell on the Peach Mountain and dyed her divine robe of judgment redder. It was as if it had been soaked in blood for thousands of years before it was put on again. She stood quietly in front of the stone house and did not look inside. Because the person who should have been inside the house was sitting in a wheelchair at the edge of the cliff and watching the sunset. Although I don't know exactly what it is, I think it must be very important since Ning Ke chose to put it at the end. The old man in the wheelchair said calmly without turning back. Yi Hongyu said, "It's important to me, but not to the human world. In other words, it's important to the past, but not to the present." The Abbey Dean said, "After all, it is still important." Yi Hongyu said, "But I don't want to hear it. Ning Ke's attitude towards you is not proper enough." The Abbey Dean smiled and said, "They sent 2 people to say 7 sentences, and now they want you to risk your life for the academy. This is too disrespectful. After all, the 7 sentences are not the 7 tomes of arcane." Yi Hongyu said, "Indeed, this is also the reason why I don't want to listen to him." The Abbey Dean said, "It's also because you already knew the truth. That's why it's not shocking enough." That's why it's hard for you to break the defense in your heart and make a decisive move. Yi Hongyu said, Ning Ke and Yu Lian still underestimated me. The Devil's Doctrine and the Academy might be able to predict everything in the world, but they can't predict what I'm thinking. The Abbey Dean sat in the wheelchair and said with a smile, I have said something similar before. I always knew it was Xiong Chumo. Yi Hongyu said, I didn't do anything after the right to light, not because I wanted to see him struggling, but because I knew you wouldn't allow it. The Abbey Dean said, I'm the master of Haotian Taoism. I won't be biased. Yi Hongyu said, I still won't do anything. I can even never do anything. The Abbey Dean looked at her gently and said, because of your faith? Because of your devotion to Haotian? Yi Hongyu said, it has nothing to do with faith. The Abbey Dean smiled and asked, then what is it? Yi Hongyu said, I want to exchange Xiong Chumo's life for another. The Abbey Dean laughed and shook his head, first, you have to prove that you can take Xiong Chumo's life. Only then can you exchange it for another's. Only what belonged to you could be exchanged for something else. Otherwise, it would be stealing or robbing. Xiong Chumo was the hierarch of the Divine Hall. He had reached the 5 states long ago and suppressed all evils with the divine light of Tianqi. Other than the eldest brother and Yu Lian, who could say that they could win? No matter how talented Yi Hongyu was, she was still too young. Even if she had reached the peak of knowing destiny state, how could she take Xiong Chumo's life? Then, I will exchange my life for his. She said, no matter how shameless Ning Ke is in this, I am still grateful to him and the 23-year cicada cultivation. Why? Because the Academy has proven my importance to the Divine Hall. They have tried their best to get my help. Haotian Taoism should also pay a high price to persuade me not to leave. The Abbey Dean smiled and did not say anything. The hierarch's life was indeed not in Yi Hongyu's hands. But she was the great divine priest of judgment and had countless loyal subordinates. If she betrayed Haotian Taoism, it would be a heavy blow to the divine halls of West Hill when the divine hall of light was deserted and the divine hall of revelation was without a leader. The Academy had done everything they could for this. Yu Lian had been waiting in silence for years, hoping to see this scene. But she did not let it happen. The Abbey Dean looked at the red clouds in the sky and said slowly, he is my most outstanding disciple. Yi Hongyu said, when he was young, people in the Abbey all thought that he was not as good as Chen Pipi. The Abbey Dean shook his head and said, not to mention others, even I used to think so. But he proved that I was wrong. Everyone was wrong. Yi Hongyu said, so you think I am not qualified to exchange for his life? The doctrine of the new stream seems to be no different from that of Haotian. But in fact, it is to take back the power from Haotian Taoism to the believers, and to take back the glory from the divine kingdom of Haotian to the secular world. The Devil's Doctrine only affects the cultivation world, but the new stream affects the entire human world. He has gone further than the divine priest of light 1,000 years ago. The Abbey Dean said calmly, in this sense, he is the biggest traitor of Taoism. He is the real gravedigger. Every time I think about this, even I, as his teacher, can't help but be moved. I even feel proud of him. Such a person can't be easily exchanged. Yi Hongyu looked at the sunset. It was the east, and there was the sea. The kingdom of Song was by the sea. You still insist on killing him? Ning Ke asked me to think about the future of Haotian Taoism. But he did not know that I have been thinking about it. The doctrine of the new stream has been established. It will spread far and wide, and there will be many believers. Killing him will not change the situation. Why should I kill him? Why should I kill him and then force you to leave? The Abbey Dean turned around and said to her with a smile. Yi Hongyu did not know what Ning Ke had said to the Abbey Dean. As I said before, you did not leave because of your faith. He looked at Yi Hongyu and said lovingly, that faith is not about Haotian, but about Yi Su. Even though he is a wastrel like me, he is much more important to you than Haotian. As long as he has a chance to live, you will not take the risk. I said that Ning Ke could not see himself clearly, so what he said to me was in vain. Obviously, he did not see you clearly, so what he said to you was also in vain. Yi Hongyu did not say anything. She admitted that this old man, who was not her teacher but was better than her teacher, had accurately grasped her mentality. Her brother's life was like a pool full of thunder and lightning. In it was his sword that once dazzled the continent. She could not move forward. As long as he could live, she could forget all the humiliations and things she wanted to forget. She could face them calmly. If the academy could not guarantee his life, then it would be meaningless to do anything else. Moreover, she knew clearly that Ning Ke was a selfish, cold-blooded and shameless person. He had proved it before, and today, he would prove it again. The dusk faded, and the snow clouds drifted away. The sky was full of stars, and among the stars, a bright moon shone on the human world, including the plateau of Peach Mountain. The Abbey Dean looked up at the bright moon and kept silent for a long time. Then he said something. His voice was as light as the moonlight on his body. It was as clear as water, without any emotion. I will give you Xiong Chimo's life. Yi Hongyu bowed to the Abbey Dean. After getting the promise she wanted, she left the plateau. Although the Abbey Dean did not promise anything except Xiong Chimo's death, she knew that her brother's life was saved. Long Qing and the drunkard who went to the Song Kingdom would not do anything. Because the Abbey Dean had made it clear that killing Yi Su now would not do any good for Taoism. The question was, did the academy not realize this? Was what Ning Ke had done in vain and would only be described as a joke in the history books? The Abbey Dean waved his hand in the cold night wind, as if he was trying to catch some moonlight. What is the thing between the hierarch and the great divine priest of judgment? Asked the middle-aged priest. The Abbey Dean shook his head and said, I don't know, and I don't need to know. The middle-aged priest was a bit worried and said, the academy is so concerned about this matter. The Abbey Dean said calmly, the academy has always claimed that they only do meaningful things and do not care about the meaning. But in fact, they never do meaningless things. What they said to me and what they said to Yi Hongyu were all part of a scheme. Ning Ke knew how destructive the new stream was to Taoism and used it to convince me. I have to admit that he was right, even though he did not see everything. If he could convince me, Taoism would lose, or end. If he couldn't, Yi Su would die, and Yi Hongyu would betray Taoism. Taoism would also lose. The middle-aged priest seemed to have realized something. He looked at the back of the Abbey Dean and praised from the bottom of his heart. If he did nothing, the academy would not be able to do anything. It seemed to be the Abbey Dean's response. It was a perfect response to the changes by remaining unchanged. However, the Abbey Dean shook his head and looked at the bright moon again. He did not say anything. Yi Hongyu walked into the divine hall of judgment and stood under the black stone pillar. She looked at the snow-covered mountains with her hands behind her back and kept silent for a long time. Her eyebrows were gradually covered by a layer of frost in the night wind. No one knew what she was thinking about. Her loyal subordinates and the girls who served her stayed in the side hall with complicated expressions. They did not dare to disturb her. The moon moved and the stars did not move. The night grew darker and darker. She looked at the direction of the kingdom of song. She seemed to be able to see the killing, the burning holy fire, and the people biting each other like beasts for their faith. There was no expression on her beautiful face, as if it was carved out of ice. At this moment, light footsteps were heard in the quiet divine hall of judgment. Logically speaking, even the slightest footstep would have alerted the black deacons in the side hall. However, what was strange was that this person walked all the way behind her and did not encounter any obstruction. Maybe it was because even the most ruthless black deacons did not dare to stop him, or maybe even the powerhouses of the judicial department could not hear his footsteps. It was a wretched-looking, short old Taoist with limbs as thin as withered branches. Xiong Chimo, the hierarch of the divine halls of West Hill, came behind her silently in the deep night. Yi Hongyu looked at the direction of the kingdom of song. She saw the snowy clouds glowing in the night sky, as if she could see the terrible storm brewing on the sea. Her face was slightly pale. She squinted her eyes, which turned into a thin line and a sword. Chapter 1053. Yi Hongyu turned around and left the moonlight and starlight behind her. The paleness on her face became lighter because of the shadow. She looked at the hierarch quietly and said nothing, but her mind was full of thoughts. Xiong Chumo also looked at her quietly. He looked at the lines outlined by the moonlight and the beautiful face in the shadow. He was sure that she was no longer the little girl he used to be. Therefore, he was inexplicably angry. Yi Hongyu was not surprised, angry, sarcastic, or hateful. She did not show any expression. It seemed that she was not surprised by his appearance. Because of her calmness, Xiong Chumo became even angrier. The ugliest and evilest act in those years was exposed, which made him very uneasy. Her calmness confused him and hurt his dignity. He would rather see a crazy and horrible great divine priest of judgment than not see him in her eyes. "What did you say to the Abbey Dean?" he asked. Yi Hongyu looked at him and did not answer. Xiong Chumo was silent for a moment and suddenly laughed. There was a trace of perverted pleasure on his ugly and wretched face. He said, "So you are afraid of me?" Yi Hongyu still did not say anything. "Yes, you are afraid of me." Xiong Chumo's eyes flickered like a wolf's and a little weird. His voice was also trembling because of excitement. "What happened in those years left a deep impression on you. When you found out it was me, you did not dare to take revenge because you were afraid of going through that experience again." Yi Hongyu looked at him and asked calmly, "Why should I be afraid?" Xiong Chumo's expression changed slightly. He did not understand why she would ask such a question. Wasn't it obvious? Even if you are not afraid now, how could the poor and weak little girl who had legs like reeds not be afraid of that shadow? His breath became heavy as if he was panting after a serious illness. His eyes were stained with a layer of bloody red and his voice was trembling. After you found out the truth, besides anger, you would also have many questions. Why did I, as the sect leader, take the risk of being discovered by Yi Su to do that? In fact, even I don't have a clear answer. When I think about it later, maybe I was jealous? He looked at the moonlight beside her hair and her beautiful face and was a little lost. Yi Hongyu said calmly, "I'm not interested in these things." "Not interested?" Xiong Chumo was stunned and said in disbelief, "You're not interested in these?" When the Abbey Dean traveled far away to the South Sea, Yi Su returned from the wilderness and entered the human realm to cultivate and meditate on life and death. Then, this happened. Don't you want to know why this happened? Yi Hongyu said expressionlessly, "You are playing childish tricks when my brother is not here." "Do I need to know what you are thinking?" Xiong Chumo's eyes were wide open. His skinny body suddenly emitted a horrifying sense of destruction. He opened his arms and said in disbelief, "A child's play?" His voice became somewhat sharp and unpleasant, like a woman's fingernails rapidly scraping against a plaster wall. It was full of anger and disbelief. "Child's play?" he repeated in a shrill voice. "You think it's just a child's play? How pitiful you cried then." No matter how much you called out to Yi Su, no one responded. "Have you been in pain all these years? I don't understand how you can place so much hope on that useless man after being humiliated so much. Yi Su can't save you." Stars were changing in the deepest part of Yi Hongyu's lake-like eyes. Many images kept changing in front of her eyes and then gradually disappeared, turning into indifference. How could she forget that? If she could forget that her body was seen by Chen Pipi in the Taoist temple, why would she want to kill her? If she could forget, why did she never care about letting others see her beautiful body? Wasn't it because she subconsciously felt that this body was dirty? Fine, then she couldn't forget it. But so what? She looked at Xiong Chumo and said sarcastically, "I'm not like those crazy professors in the Revelation Institute. I'm not interested in your psychological state. Maybe you are jealous of him, or you are out of your mind, or you want to lick the Abbey Dean's feet. I don't care about those things. Xiong Chimo stared at her beautiful face and said word by word, that's not a child's play. Yi Hongyu stared at his ugly face and said word by word, but you are just a child. Xiong Chimo was extremely short and skinny, far shorter than an ordinary person. He had been hiding behind the light curtain all these years and made himself look tall and big. It was because of this mental illness. Back then, he took a great risk to bully Yi Hongyu, who was still a little girl. Maybe it was because of this mental illness. Yi Hongyu said indifferently, I know what you want to see. You want to see me sad, angry, and desperate. You want to see me feel ashamed because I'm not clean anymore. But unfortunately, you won't see it. Because I don't want to play these childish games with you. Another child's trick. Xiong Chimo's face turned extremely ugly. The dim light in his eyes became crazier and his aura became more terrifying. He said coldly, I'm not a child. You're even shorter than a 10-year-old. Yi Hongyu was much taller than him and looked down at him. Then her eyes gradually moved down and fell between his legs. Decades ago, your penis was destroyed by Yu Lian. Even if you want to do anything to me, you can't. Why should I feel ashamed? She said, in terms of height, you are a child. In terms of mind, you are a child. In terms of sexual ability, you will always be a child. Anger and extreme anger occupied Xiong Chimo's body and mind. But strangely, he gradually calmed down. He squinted his eyes and kept silent for a long time. So you take it as, being bitten by a mad dog? At this moment, he raised his aura to the peak, and his whole body was illuminated. Xiong Chimo didn't know why Zhao Nanhai showed up, but he welcomed the change. Because Zhao Nanhai's appearance probably represented the Abbey Dean's will. Yi Hongyu looked at the entrance of the Divine Hall of Judgment. The middle-aged priest was also here. He had been handling chores in the Jishou Abbey for decades and stood behind the Abbey Dean's wheelchair for years. He did not do anything, as if he was just an ordinary person. He was just like an ordinary person, standing there in an ordinary way. Yi Hongyu closed her eyes and began to think. At dusk on the cliff plateau, the Abbey Dean had said that he would give Xiong Chimo's life to her. But she would not think that the middle-aged priest was here to keep his promise. Killing the hierarch now would not do Taoism any good. So the middle-aged priest was not here to kill the hierarch. What was he here for? Long Qing was in the Song Kingdom, and Hengmu was in the Qinghe Kingdom. None of them were on Peach Mountain. The four people in the Divine Hall of Judgment were the four most powerful people in Taoism. Yi Hongyu opened her eyes. She was enlightened, but still confused. Why? Why did the Abbey Dean want to kill her? I will return to Hubei tomorrow for the new year. I have been on the road for the whole day, so there is no update. Chapter 1054. Yi Hongyu believed that the Abbey Dean was far better than the academy, especially the academy under Ning Kei's leadership. She also believed that her judgment was correct. Killing her and her brother would do Taoism no good, no matter if it was for the immediate benefits or the more far-reaching effects. That was why she had the courage to choose to retreat, to give up a lot, and to put herself in danger. She did nothing so that both sides could look at each other calmly. However, less than 2 hours after the conversation at dusk ended, the moonlight shone brightly in the night sky. The silent agreement she once thought had suddenly disappeared. The hierarch came to the Divine Hall of Judgment to kill her, followed by Zhao Nanhai and the middle-aged priest. The three of them did not know each other would come here, but they gathered here for the same goal, to kill her. Yi Hongyu frowned. There were 2 light strokes on her pale face. Her doubts and shock could not be resolved, but she did not have time to think about it. Looking at the 3 people in the Divine Hall of Judgment, her eyes became brighter and brighter. If Ning Kei were here, he would know that it was her reaction when she met a strong opponent. She would be vigilant but not lose confidence. She would be excited to meet a real powerhouse, and then she would use the toughest means to defeat her opponent. She had shown such eyes many times in the past years of cultivation, such as when she met Ning Quebec. But her eyes were brightest when she faced June Amo in front of the verdant canyon. Tonight, her eyes were unusually bright, even brighter than they had been a few years ago in the verdant canyon. Because the three enemies she was facing were all very powerful and could be compared to June Amo. The hierarch of the divine halls of West Hill was a powerhouse in the Tianqi realm above the 5 states. Xiong Chimo's title was simple, but it did not mean that he was boring. It only meant that he was terrifying. Once he passed the threshold of the knowing destiny state, he would enter another world and a totally different level of cultivation. Yi Hongyu knew clearly that she could not defeat Xiong Chimo. If she could, she would have killed the Abbey Dean a long time ago after the right to light. Zhao Nanhai came from the South Sea. He was the descendant of the great divine priest of light who split the West Hill Divine Palace 600 years ago. His attainments in divine incantation were among the top 3 in the world. He shared the same path with the West Hill Divine Palace but did not share it. His state was unfathomable and he was at the peak of knowing destiny state. He would not be at a disadvantage even if he fought Yi Hongyu alone. Xiong Chimo and Zhao Nanhai were undoubtedly the most powerful bigwigs in the divine halls of West Hill. Compared to them, the middle-aged priest standing at the gate of the divine hall of judgment seemed very ordinary. However, he was the one who truly made Yi Hongyu feel wary. She even faintly felt a chill in her Taoist heart. The middle-aged Taoist stood at the door and did nothing, but it seemed that he had isolated the divine hall of judgment from the outside. During this time, Yi Hongyu tried several ways to inform her subordinates, but they all failed. This ordinary-looking Taoist was definitely not an ordinary Taoist. The Abbey Dean had been banished to the South Sea by the headmaster. During those years, the Jishou Abbey had been managed by this Taoist. His status in Haotian Taoism had not fallen. How could he be ordinary? Xiong Chimo, Zhao Nanhai, the middle-aged priest, the 3 of them could go anywhere in the world and kill anyone. Even if Yu Lian encountered them, she would have to turn into a cicada and hide in the snow forest. Even if Mr. First encountered them, he would have to stay far away from them. Even the drunkard, the butcher, or the chief monk of scripture might be killed by them. Yi Hongyu thought to herself, how could she win? The divine hall of judgment was dead silent. On the black stone walls, the night luminescent lamps were emitting soft and beautiful light. No one knew when the pearls became bright or what triggered them. Xiong Chimo, Zhao Nanhai, and the middle-aged priest stood in silence. They occupied the divine hall from the far end, the middle, and the near end. Their aura filled the air and completely sealed off the huge hall. She was the only one in the spacious divine hall. She walked down the terrace and came to the side of the seat of heavenly black jade. She raised her arm and put it on the cold seat. After a long silence, she looked at the middle-aged priest and said, Haotian will give his followers a chance to choose, or explain. The middle-aged priest said nothing. Xiong Chimo was confused. Even though he was the hierarch of the divine hall, he had no idea why things would turn out like this. He wanted to provoke Yi Hongyu and then kill her. But why did the Abbey Dean send Zhao Nanhai and the middle-aged priest to help him? He wanted to know the explanation as well. Yi Hongyu looked at him and said emotionlessly, I still don't understand. How could a commoner like him reach above the 5 states? Is Haotian blind? The middle-aged priest said seriously, the power of the hierarch lies in his naivety. Yi Hongyu raised her eyebrows and said mockingly, naivety is childish? The middle-aged priest smiled and did not explain anything. He said, there are thousands of Taoism skills. To reach the end, you still need to be naive and follow your heart. Childish or even cruel, they have nothing to do with each other. Naivety, Yi Hongyu pondered and looked at Xiong Chimo. She said, you are rotten from body to heart. You are stupid and stubborn. You believe in what you believe and listen to what you believe. Can such naivety bring you power? It is said that Shinpipi is a rare genius in Haotian Taoism. Is it because of this? The middle-aged priest thought for a while and said, Pippi is optimistic but knows his destiny. I think it is different. Yi Hongyu looked at his eyes and said, I don't care how naive or stupid people know their destiny. I only know that the Abbey Dean said he would give his life to me. But now it seems that he is going to do the opposite. The middle-aged priest said calmly, maybe one autumn, the Abbey Dean will help the Hierarch Lord return to Haotian's divine kingdom and meet you there. This is also a way to send him off. Yi Hongyu said, sending him off after his death is a sacrifice. The middle-aged priest said, sacrifice is also a way to send him off. Yi Hongyu remained silent. When a figure like the Abbey Dean started to play tricks like a child, there were probably not many people in the world who could be his opponent. Then, please explain to me. She looked at the middle-aged priest and said seriously, please give me a real explanation. She couldn't accept ending up without knowing the cause and effect. The middle-aged priest said, sorry, I can't tell you. Yi Hongyu looked at Zhao Nanhai. Zhao Nanhai, who had been silent since he entered the Divine Hall of Judgment, finally said, sorry, I don't understand. Finally, she looked at the hierarch. Then, come on. Thousands of miles away from the West Hill, there were countless fertile fields and poor villages, as well as towns. It was not night yet. Under the sunlight, the remaining snow in Cheng and looked like a blank piece of painting. The remaining snow on the city wall was more well-preserved and looked like a piece of white paper that had not yet been written. On the southern city wall, there were a few ink spots on the white paper. They were tents and temporary wooden houses. There were 2 earthen stoves outside the houses. Steam rose from the stoves. The ash was darker than the snow, so it must be very hot. Ning Ke squatted beside the stove and stared at the hot ashes, waiting for the moment when the roasted sweet potatoes were completely cooked. However, he subconsciously thought of the 2 solitary graves outside the city, the 2 urns in the graves, the 2 handfuls of ashes in the urns, and the person who used to hold the ashes. Therefore, he inexplicably felt sad and stood up to walk to the wall. Standing behind the city wall, he felt a little lonely. He did not like this feeling, nor did he like to show this feeling to the sergeants behind him. So he tried to look far away and did not want to rub his eyes. The scenery inside the city wall was the streets and alleys of Cheng and city, as well as the people in the streets. He thought that this kind of city scenery was lively and could dilute his emotions. However, when he saw the Yanming Lake in the distance, he realized that this hope was just wishful thinking. The old brush pen shop was hidden in the messy streets of the eastern city and could not be seen at all. This made him even more depressed, and he could only hope to see changes in the situation as soon as possible. After killing thousands of people and staining the Sisui red, he finally won the chance to negotiate with Haotian Taoism and the possibility of buying time. Only then could he send the 2 paragraphs to Peach Mountain. A paragraph for the Abbey Dean and a paragraph for Yi Hongyu. These 2 paragraphs seemed simple, but in fact, he had used all his effort and experience in his 2 lives. All the information from the Academy and the Tang Imperial Court could only be used as footnotes to these 2 paragraphs. He naturally had high hopes for the effect of these 2 paragraphs. He was waiting for the good news from Peach Mountain, but he could never imagine what he would be waiting for. After all, he was not Sang Sang who could calculate everything. He was just an ordinary person. Chapter 1055. Ning Ke was just an ordinary person. Then why was he so confident that the 2 paragraphs he said would have a corresponding effect and would not disappear with the wind? Because the 2 paragraphs had nothing to do with psychological warfare. What he told the Abbey Dean was the knowledge of his last life, and what he told Yi Hongyu was the experience of this life. No matter how he calculated, he could not find any loopholes. No matter how he looked at it, it was right, and it would work. More importantly, it was his understanding of the Abbey Dean and Yi Hongyu. He believed that he would be able to convince someone like the Abbey Dean and someone like Yi Hongyu. One of them would definitely be convinced by him. If he could convince the Abbey Dean, the human world would be under his control. That would be the best. If he could convince Yi Hongyu to split Taoism, the Academy would definitely win. As for Yi Su would die. Yi Hongyu would probably think that he was a cold-blooded bastard. Or had she already thought of this, but she still had to pin her hopes on the Academy? Ning Ke stood by the city wall and looked at the Yanming Lake in the distance. Snowflakes fell from the sky again. He felt his hands on the city wall became colder and the array pestle in his arms was about to become a block of ice. Yes, since the day Sang Sang left the human world on that big ship and returned to the Divine Kingdom, when he was sure that she would never come back and that they would never meet again, some changes began to happen. The city of Wei was slaughtered, the general died, and so did she. He could no longer maintain enough emotional warmth for the human world, the Divine Kingdom, and the whole world. He became more and more indifferent to reality. It was not because he was numb to pain, nor was it because of disappointment. It was because the person who had warmed his heart was gone. So he was gradually becoming the Ning Ke of old. The boy who held a rusty knife in the woodshed and refused to die facing the young master and the housekeeper. The boy who walked among the corpses and cannibals and refused to die. The boy who wandered among the dangerous beasts and the even more dangerous hunters and refused to die. The boy who chopped firewood and killed people by the Shubi Lake and refused to die. That was the Ning Ke of old. He did not know right or wrong, nor did he know what morality was. He did not care about the lives of innocent people. No matter who they were just tools for him to use. Before third sister left, she told him the secret and let him know about Yi Hongyu's humiliating and painful past. He sympathized with her, but he did not hesitate to take advantage of it. Of course, Yi Hongyu was still special to him. That was why he told Shin Qi not to reveal this matter until the last moment. Even if he did, he would be careful with his words. He would not let anyone know about the past. As long as he could protect Yi Hongyu's reputation, he would feel no guilt. As for Yi Su, he did not care about the life or death of the founder of the new stream. It was Taoism's own business. If Yi Su could survive and help the new stream spread, the Academy already had a plan. If Yi Su died, he would definitely become a sage, which would be more beneficial to the spread of the new stream and the Academy. In a sense, he was a disciple of the headmaster of the Academy. He learned the skills of the Academy and inherited Kuhaoren's legacy. But in essence, he was the successor of Lotus. Jun Mo was far away in the West Wilderness, and the eldest brother was guarding the drunkard. Yu Lian and he were the ones who were really in charge of the Academy's affairs and leading the Academy forward. They had long been possessed by the devil. Before Yu Lian became the Grand Master of the Devil's Doctrine, she was Lotus's hope. So it seemed that the Academy was following Lotus's path instead of the headmaster of the Academy. Would Lotus feel gratified or even overjoyed if he knew this after his death? But there were still some differences. The biggest difference was that Ning Ke did not go crazy. He was calculating everything calmly and coldly. He thought deeper than the Abbey Dean thought. He sent Chu Yuxian and Chen Qi to the Peach Mountain and overturned the dining table in such a drastic way to force Taoism to respond. He knew very well that as long as the Abbey Dean did not go crazy, Yi Su would not die, and Yi Hongyu would not betray Taoism. Taoism could only cope with changes by remaining unchanged and keep the human world quiet. This ending seemed to be a merciless mockery of his plan. But no one knew that this was the Academy's original goal. Because he desperately needed more time. Ning Ke leaned against the snow wall and looked at the dark sky. He looked at the bright moon that had not yet appeared. He thought that the headmaster could not win this battle, but he had to buy more time for the Academy. In the human world, only those who had the real divine sense like the Abbey Dean and the drunkard could see the subtle changes in the Divine Kingdom. Ning Ke was still far from that state, but he could see it clearly with the help of the big tactical array in Chang'an. He knew that the moon was slowly darkening, which made people sad. The headmaster of the academy was gradually losing in the battle against Haotian. Time seemed to be on Taoism's side, which was extremely disadvantageous to the academy. But Ning Ke thought differently. Everything he did was to buy more time. Only with enough time could he slowly plan and solve the problem of Xiangwan Plain. Only with enough time could he wait for the good news from the depths of the western wilderness, and wait for the unbridgeable crack in Taoism to widen. More importantly, as time went by, more and more people believed in the new stream, and Haotian would become weaker and weaker. He was taught by the headmaster of the academy, inherited the youngest uncle, enlightened by Lotus, and favored by Master Chishan. He cultivated Buddhism in the Nirvana world for thousands of years and traveled thousands of miles with Sang Sang. He cultivated Taoism, Buddhism, and the Devil's Way. He had already understood the nature of faith. Haotian was no longer high in his eyes. Many years ago, Taoism chose Haotian for human beings. When the new stream appeared and Taoism declined, Haotian would also become weaker. It seemed too simple, but it was so correct. Therefore, the new stream and Yi Su were very important to the academy and the Tang Empire. The new stream must have time to spread to more places and win more believers. Yi Su must be the founder of the sect, alive or dead. For this, Ning Ke did not hesitate to kill thousands of people to endorse Yi Su and the new stream. But intentionally or unintentionally, he did not comment on how Taoism would deal with Yi Su. He looked at the gray sky and the falling snow in the distance and remained silent for a long time. He thought he could understand the Abbé Dean's thoughts. After all, the moon was darkening. Taoism and the academy both believed that time was in their favor. It depended on whether the academy and the new stream would work together to weaken Haotian first, or she would defeat the headmaster first. He was betting on the former. If the Abbé Dean did not agree with him, then he was betting on the latter. Ning Ke was confident about this gamble. That was because Haotian Taoism chose Haotian on behalf of human beings countless years ago. But in the end, they placed all their hopes on Haotian. Unlike the academy, Ning Ke pinned his hopes on the Tang Empire, Yi Su, and the new stream. All of them placed their hopes on the human world. Hope was in the human world. Hope should be in the human world. He looked at the sky and thought so. There was a mountain outside Lingang, and a small building suddenly appeared on the mountain. It was autumn. After winter, the wind and snow came, and so did the crowd. Hundreds and thousands of devout followers of Haotian knelt at the foot of the mountain and kept kowtowing to the small building. Naturally, no one dared to cross the line of defense of the cavalrymen of divine halls. The new emperor died, and the sword garret collapsed. The subjects and people of South Jin had experienced too many things this year. Watching the war about to break out and the powerful northern neighbor about to die, the people were naturally depressed and nervous. Therefore, the small building, which was said to be the home of a living immortal, became the object of their worship. The two people in the building did not know about these things. Even if they knew, they would not care. Because of their status in the human world, it was not exaggerated to say that they were immortals. The drunkard leaned against the railing and drank. The snow on the railing was swept away by his sleeves, and some stained his clothes. Together with the leftover wine on his clothes, it was a strange and intoxicating smell. The eldest brother stood on the cliff outside the building, looking at the east in silence. A few days ago, the secret guards of the Tang Empire sent some bad news. Something might happen in the kingdom of Song, and some people from Taoism had already arrived there. He wanted to go there and have a look, because Yi Su was there. But he could not leave, because the drunkard was there. The drunkard should have been there, but he was drinking alone in the small building because of him. He could not travel alone. This was the most important agreement between the eldest brother and the drunkard, and also between the academy and Taoism. No one could violate it, or it would be a war. If he and the drunkard did not return to the human world, there might still be hope for the human world. Chapter 1056. Firstly, I didn't update today. Recently, I haven't updated anything. I've been saying in the comments section that I don't want to be an eyesore. But today is an exception. Tomorrow is Chinese New Year's Eve, and I want to wish everyone a Happy New Year. In the past few years, I've had to take 10 days off during Chinese New Year. This year is no exception. Because of my health, I've been working intermittently for the past 6 months. The good thing is that I've quit drinking and playing less, so I have more time. Therefore, I don't think I'll be taking leave this year. Although it's Chinese New Year, I'll still write when I can. Yep, I'll try my best to update tomorrow. I really want to try working on Chinese New Year's Eve. At that time, perhaps everyone will be busy, but there will always be people who are as free as me. Since the Academy did not spend time on the two of them, then it must be spent on someone or something that could change the situation of the human world. With his wisdom, it only took him a short time to figure out that it could only be the new stream and Yi Su. If the human world was a complicated game of chess, the deciding factor would be Yi Su in the Song Kingdom. Ning Ke was a very cold person. If he was sure that he could not solve the chess game and save Yi Su, he would definitely abandon Yi Su without hesitation and then try to gain the most benefits from it. The drunkard thought in silence and thought that if he were in Ning Ke's position, he would probably make the same choice. The situation was complicated, but the situation in the Song Kingdom was very simple. Even a child could count the number of powerhouses in Taoism and the Academy. If Taoism really wanted to kill Yi Su at all costs, the Academy could not stop it, because Yi Su did not choose to go to Cheng and to accept the Academy's protection. Youngest brother talked to the Abbey Dean because he wanted Yi Su to live. The eldest brother looked at the drunkard and said, he believed that he could persuade the Abbey Dean. The drunkard asked, what about Haotian? The eldest brother looked at him quietly and said slowly and firmly, Haotian can be gone. The drunkard looked at him and said for a long time, I can't accept it. For the Academy, Haotian could be gone. Even for Taoism and the Abbey Dean, Haotian could be gone. But for the drunkard and the butcher, Haotian could not be gone. If Ning Ke could persuade the Abbey Dean, the human world would return to peace, the new stream would spread, Haotian would be weakened, and the divine kingdom would be destroyed and replaced by the human world one day. Then where could he and the butcher find eternity? A few years ago, Sang Sang came to the small town and made a promise to him and the butcher in the butcher's shop. If she died, what would be the point of those promises? You don't have to accept it. The eldest brother said, youngest brother said that you and the butcher must accept it. If he could persuade the Abbey Dean, then the first thing the human world would do is to kill you. The drunkard felt the wine was a little strong today. Otherwise, why would he feel a little tipsy? He smiled sarcastically and said, it's not that easy to kill us. Facing the whole human world, even you two have to give way. The eldest brother looked at him and said calmly, because you are not the headmaster. He is the human world. You are not the youngest uncle. You have to go alone even if there are thousands of people. You will give way to him and hide behind the Taoist tree to see what the human world will choose. This is actually acceptance. It was a judgment that came from the eldest brother's heart. He never lied, which was even more powerful. It was like a rough knife chopping on the drunkard's head. The drunkard did not know if he was in pain. He only knew that he was speechless. Therefore, the human world is now waiting for the Abbey Dean's choice. The eldest brother said at last. The eastern sky of Lincoln was covered with a layer of dark clouds. As soon as the voice in the small building faded away, snowflakes began to fall from the layer of clouds. The snowflakes became extremely heavy in an instant. Through the flying snowflakes, the drunkard looked at the Peach Mountain in the distance. After a long silence, he said, maybe Ning Ke has really succeeded. The eldest brother looked to the south and smiled. The aroma of the wine faded with the snow and wind and disappeared. The drunkard disappeared from the small building and was nowhere to be found. The next moment, he returned to the small town. He did not go to the tea house to meet his rare friend. Instead, he went to the butcher's shop and found his friend of 10,000 years. He sat down in silence and did not speak for a long time. The butcher saw that he looked tired and there was dust between his eyebrows. He tightened his grip on the oil knife. What happened? The drunkard answered, I don't know what will happen. That's why I feel uneasy. No one knew what would happen in the human world. No one knew what Ning Ke said. No one knew what the Abbey Dean would choose. From the cold north to the warm South Sea, everyone was waiting in silence and anxiety. But there was still hope for the unknown. When everything fell into place, hope might turn into despair. It's such a wonderful feeling to work on the night of the New Year's Eve. The Spring Festival Gala was playing on the TV. I looked up from time to time and talked with my family. I felt that the Spring Festival Gala was very good. I even thought it was the best one in the past 10 years. Of course, it was not because of the Academy on the Spring Festival Gala this year. I wish you all a Happy New Year. Only in this way could he inflict pain on the person in the far south. The imperial tutor was silent for a moment before replying to his disciples' trust in him. The problem is that we don't know where she is. Yes, this was the biggest problem. Although the iron arrow pointing at the grassland in the distant south was terrifying, as long as one was prepared, one could always find a way to deal with it. As long as one controlled the state or the output of psyche power, the iron arrow could not affect this place at all. But what about the other person? That person was born and grew up in the wilderness. Although he had disappeared for decades, as long as he was still alive, he would be the most legendary powerhouse on the grassland and the most horrible demon. Lin Wu, the Grand Master of the Devil's Doctrine, the 23-year cicada cultivation, the third sister of the Academy, Yu Lian. No matter what her name or identity was, she would always be the most feared person of the grassland barbarians. In recent years, it was rumored that she was in the eastern wilderness. Therefore, the powerhouses of the Left-Tent Palace were gradually declining and almost all of them were killed by her. Therefore, the National Master and the 13 priests had been guarding outside the city of Helan. This winter, the National Master finally left the city of Helan and came to the field in the south. No one knew what he was here for, but everyone knew that it must have something to do with Yu Lian. Ada understood. He looked at the Tang army in the south unwillingly and turned back. He walked into the carriage and retreated to the city of Wei with his teacher. I heard that the Divine Hall is negotiating with the Academy. Yes. So there can be no war for the time being? Yes. Peace. I hate this word. That's for Haotian to decide. As the master and disciple conversed, the carriages moved further and further away. Not long after, they disappeared into the depths of the wind and snow. Still, no one knew where the imperial advisor was going or what he was going to do. However, everyone knew that the imperial advisor was waiting for someone to appear. He was waiting for the arrival of the Iron Arrow. Naturally, he was also waiting for Haotian's choice. Haotian decided everything in the human world. To put it simply, it was preordained. There was a sense of helplessness in the word, but also the calmness of obedience. However, Sang Sang had already left the human world. How could she tell her will to the billions of believers? When she was silent like she was in the past, the so-called will of Haotian was just the will of Taoism. To be precise, it was the will of the Abbey Dean. Hengmu stood in front of tens of thousands of cavalrymen and looked at the verdant canyon that was destined to be written in the history books. He slowly raised his right arm. On the square of the capital of the Kingdom of Song, the cavalrymen who besieged the followers of the new stream reined in and retreated. The divine priests and deacons stopped attacking because there was a new order from the Taoist hall. The Golden Tribe royal court was waiting for the Abbey Dean's choice. Chang'an City was waiting for the Abbey Dean's choice. Everyone was waiting for the Abbey Dean's choice, only Long Qing seemed to know nothing. He could not hear the nervous breathing of thousands of people outside the wall and did not receive the latest news from the Divine Hall. He felt that the pile of firewood in the yard was not spectacular enough. He picked up the chopper again and chopped the firewood unskillfully, imagining the fire that would come later. The night was getting longer and the human world was getting colder. The warm West Hill Divine Kingdom also had a few heavy snowfalls this winter. The cliff plateau was covered with residual snow. Under the moonlight, the traces of the wheelchair were very clear. The middle-aged priest stood behind the wheelchair and looked solemn. He thought that Haotian Taoism could solve Ning Kei's situation by remaining unchanged. But it seemed that the Abbey Dean did not think so. Ning Kei only wants Haotian Taoism to suppress the enemy. But it doesn't make sense. The middle-aged priest looked up at the bright moon in the night sky and thought about the possible battle in the distant Divine Kingdom. He frowned and said, "The headmaster of the academy is getting darker. The longer we delay, the more disadvantageous it will be for the academy." The Abbey Dean sat in the wheelchair and looked at the world under the moonlight. He was calm and silent. The middle-aged priest suddenly understood and said, "So this is what he wants too." It was related to the root of faith. He could only vaguely understand it, but he could not explain it clearly. As he said this, the temperature on the cliff plateau suddenly dropped and the cold wind blew. The bright moon was still in the sky, but snow fell from the clouds somewhere. The snow came very quickly and the thick snowflakes fluttered in the air. It did not take long for the cliff and the wheelchair to be covered with a layer of snow. The Abbey Dean was also covered by the snowflakes. The words that came out of his lips suddenly became colder after being soaked by the snowflakes, just like the meaning in his words. He wants to talk to the world. I also want to know what he wants to talk about. Unfortunately, he has been imprisoned in Chang'an for half a year. He thought he understood everything, but he was wrong after all. The Abbey Dean said, "He can't see clearly himself or Yi Hongyu. Most importantly, he can't see clearly what kind of situation the human world is in now." The middle-aged priest said, "He doesn't stand high enough, so he can't see far enough." There was no one in the human world who could stand as high as the Abbey Dean. The middle-aged priest pushed the wheelchair toward the cliff plateau. The wheelchair left 2 deep marks on the snow, which were then broken by new footprints. It was like the fate line of the human world. The story Ning Kei told me was very interesting. In the words of the Academy, very interesting means very meaningful. It is indeed difficult to convince people, but at least it can be used to scare people. The Abbey Dean said with a smile, "The problem is that there is no God in his story. There is no God in that world. But in our world, there is Haotian." The middle-aged priest's expression became more and more solemn. His footsteps became heavier and heavier. The footprints on the snow became deeper and deeper, as if they were going to be deeply carved into the cliff stones. Haotian, of course, was the most serious topic. Of course, as I said before, I have to agree with the Academy's judgment. So do I. Taoism will definitely fail, and Haotian will eventually perish. The Abbey Dean's smile suddenly disappeared. He was expressionless, but the emotions in the depths of his eyes became extremely complicated. At first, he was confused and even afraid, but eventually, he became calm. But, so what? The master of Haotian Taoism said that Taoism would be destroyed. The most devout believer and the most powerful spokesperson of Haotian said that Haotian would die. If these words were to spread to the human world, what kind of shock and chaos would it bring? But the Abbey Dean had already calmed down after saying these words. He looked at the human world with a smile, without thinking about anything. He looked so quiet and tranquil, as cute as a newborn child. Ning Kei was right about one thing. Taoism and the Academy, the headmaster and I, in a sense, are indeed the same people. We are walking on the same path, and we all have ideas about the human world. It is just that we have chosen different paths. Our views on the future of the world and the future of mankind are different, so the methods we choose and the ultimate goals are also different. Ning Ke will not agree with the path I choose, so there will be no peace. How can we really be the same people when we are so different? The Abbey Dean said, as you said, he did not stand high enough, and did not see far enough. He did not see the most important person. But I did. So the Academy has lost. The question that Ning Ke set for Taoism seemed to be a dilemma, forcing Taoism to remain calm, and there was no solution at all. But for the Abbey Dean, the question was actually very simple. Yi Su's life and Yi Hongyu's departure were not a problem for the Abbey Dean. The Abbey Dean thought that he could just kill the brother and sister. He did not care that Yi Su might become a sage, or how far the new church would spread. He did not care that Yi Hongyu would die or betray the divine hall of judgment, or that the Taoism would be in chaos. He did not care, because everything was predestined. Taoism belonged to Haotian Taoism, and Haotian Taoism. Haotian himself had admitted defeat, so how could her Taoism win? The world outside the cliff was the human world. It was covered with snow, and it was impossible to tell the sky from the ground, as if they had been connected. So what? After all, it is the matter of mankind. If Haotian is dead, then we will find a new one. If Taoism is destroyed, then we will create a new one. That is all. The Abbey Dean said. Chapter 1059. The middle-aged priest looked pale. His tranquil Taoist heart, which could never be shaken by the spring rain and autumn wind, suddenly trembled uncontrollably and even showed signs of collapse. What he heard, the hidden meaning behind the words, and the Abbey Dean's thoughts were too cruel and terrifying for the followers of Taoism. It was said that the great divine priest of light was the closest to Haotian. But he knew that the Abbey Dean had always been the closest to Haotian since 1,000 years ago. When Haotian came to the human world a few years ago and the Abbey Dean met her, the closeness became real in a theological sense. They did not see each other, but met each other. Was he afraid because he saw her? No, he was no longer afraid after seeing it. He dared to think about it, kill it, destroy it, and seize it. Compared to this, whether it was Lotus ambition, the Academy's ideals, or Haotian's own thoughts, they were all inferior. Ning Ke's question was even more ridiculous. The middle-aged Taoist did not question his judgment. He looked at the snow on the cliffs and felt the cold wind blowing against his face. He suddenly felt a little sad because he was about to see the destruction of a complete old world. The old world that he had once worshipped and protected with all his heart, the world that he cared about. Is there really no other way? The flame of the new stream will burn the entire human world. The old Taoism and the old divine halls will all become the new sacrifices in the fire. Even if the headmaster of academy in the Tang Empire are destroyed, Taoism cannot change the result. But why should we be sad? It's just nirvana. We should celebrate. Is the nirvana that Buddha mentioned going to happen in this winter? That monk only cares about himself. Why would he care about the entire human world? What should we do next? The fate of the human world was decided by heaven. The Abbey Dean turned his eyes from the night sky to the world of wind and snow at the foot of the mountain. He looked at it for a while and continued, but now it's in the human world. Of course we have to find her first. Ning Ke asked him to care more about the human world. In fact, he had always cared about it more than anyone else. How could he not care about it when it was supposed to be in heaven? After saying this, the Abbey Dean said no more. He looked at the wind and snow outside the cliff, at the villages and fields on the other side of the wind and snow, and at the moonlight that could not be stopped by the wind and snow. He smiled and said nothing. On the curtain of the night, the clouds were sometimes in the east, and sometimes in the west. Although snowflakes kept falling, they could not cover everything. The moonlight shrouded the whole world. The wind on the cliff rolled up the snowflakes and danced with the moonlight. As the night deepened, it became colder and colder. The Abbey Dean sat in the chair for a long time, but he was still energetic. A few years ago, during the battle in Chang'an, he was seriously injured by the disciples of the academy with the help of the God-stunning array. Later, he met Sang Sang and was punished by Haotian. Since then, he had become a disabled old man with his ocean of qi and mountain of snow destroyed. Logically speaking, it would be extremely difficult for him to endure such a bitter cold night. However, he just sat there quietly without coughing. His face was not pale, and there were even 2 red spots on his cheeks. His expression was always so calm. His eyes were filled with a yearning for the beautiful scenery of the world, and he was curious about the moonlight, snowflakes, and the sky that sprinkled moonlight and snowflakes. He was as innocent as a child. Hengmu and Ada, the divine sons left by Haotian in the human world, often looked innocent as well. However, that innocence came from their alienation from the human world and their own age. The Abbey Dean's innocence was different. He looked at the human world quietly and thought about it. He seemed to be ignorant and omniscient. He was a little dull, but not disgusting. He was a little cute, but not annoying. He was different from Hengmu and the others. He was also different from the previous Abbey Dean. He was calmer, like an unintentional cloud that floated out of the mountain, pure and admirable. When he entered Chang'an, he flew in the wind like an immortal. In the eyes of the common people, he was like a real immortal. After he was disabled, he became a real mortal. From an immortal to a human, he was a Jinren. The middle-aged priest looked at him in the chair and felt the innocent aura. He vaguely understood something and sighed with emotion. It turned out that there was a world above the tranquility. The Abbey Dean suddenly moved. His hands left his knees and slowly landed on the armrests of the wheelchair. The snow under his palms melted into spring water due to the heat. His expression was as pleasant as spring water. The middle-aged priest was shocked and speechless. He was shocked because his guess had become a reality. It seemed that the guess that excited him was about to become a reality. The middle-aged priest's hands on the wheelchair trembled a little. The Abbey Dean's scheme was broken by the academy and his people were heard in Chang'an. However, it was Haotian who really turned him into a mortal. What did this mean? The Abbey Dean stood up and left the wheelchair. It was like the action that human beings had done tens of thousands of years ago. The snowflakes mixed with the moonlight fell slowly on the cliff plateau. The cold wind kept blowing, making the Abbey Dean's indigo Taoist robe flutter. However, it could not mess up his white hair. Look, it really looks like a dog. The Abbey Dean looked at the night sky and said slowly. The middle-aged priest did not understand what the Abbey Dean meant. He also did not know that 20 years ago, the headmaster of the academy raised his cup to the sky and said something that sounded different but actually had the same meaning. After saying this, the Abbey Dean clasped his hands behind his back and walked down the cliff in the wind and snow. His indigo robe fluttered in the wind and snow. In the deep night, he left Peach Mountain and disappeared. Looking at the footprints left by the Abbey Dean, the middle-aged priest was silent. The Abbey Dean had already walked down Peach Mountain. All he could see was his back view and his heart filled with awe. After a long time, he came to his senses. He looked at the wheelchair and smiled. He pushed the empty wheelchair to the edge of the cliff and pushed it down. The cliff was so high that the sound of falling snow could be heard. Naturally, the sound of the wheelchair falling could not be heard here. No one knew when the Abbey Dean would return to the Peach Mountain. The middle-aged priest quickly calmed down. He was a true powerhouse of Taoism and he had absolute confidence in the Abbey Dean. Taoism had existed for countless years and had produced many great figures. They had contributed a lot of wisdom to mankind. For thousands of years, the glory of the human world seemed to be concentrated on the headmaster of the academy and the headmaster of the academy. But Taoism was still Taoism and the Abbey Dean was still the Abbey Dean. The middle-aged priest left the cliff plateau and went to the divine hall of revelation. No one knew what he said to Zhao Nanhai in the divine hall. But then Zhao Nanhai silently followed him to the divine hall of judgment. At that time, the hierarch had already arrived. Looking at the woman wearing the divine robe of judgment on the terrace, the hierarch admired her. She walked to the seat of heavenly black jade in the moonlight and bloomed like a flower of blood. He had always admired her. He had liked her since they were little. But he had to kill her today. The Abbey Dean had decided the life and death of her and her brother. Please give me a real explanation. Sorry, I can't say. Something went wrong when I logged in. I have to go to the village tomorrow, so I have no time to write. I hope everyone has a good time and drink less. Chapter 1060. The 13th of February had to be a very important day. The academy had 2 floors, and there were 13 disciples on the 2nd floor. Ning Kei was the 13th. The coming night was a story about idiots. There were a bunch of idiots in the academy, living happily, living like idiots. This year, I wasn't happy. I was just a little idiot. I perfectly fulfilled most of the promises I made to everyone before the new year. I only drank some wine on the 4th day of the new year. Other than that, I didn't touch a drop of alcohol. I didn't go out to play either. I didn't waste my time. However, I couldn't do anything. Since the 5th day of the new year, I basically stayed at home to recuperate. Well, what an indescribable failure. Looking back at the past 6 months, I really had a lot of feelings and annoyances. Tomorrow, I would resume updating. I didn't want to be so intermittent anymore. That would be too weak. I couldn't allow myself to be so weak anymore. Because I was strong and the stories I wrote were very good. I wanted to overwhelm everything. I used the words I wrote many years ago when I wrote about Ingxiu to encourage myself. At the same time, I wanted to encourage everyone, no matter what kind of situation we encounter, we must not be depressed. We can't be depressed. We can only be lush. That is unbridled growth. If I were a fish, I would jump out of the sea. If I were a flower, I would bloom wildly on the other side of the shore. I would bloom everywhere and keep on blooming. I would be an idiot. This was probably what a weirdo meant. I just wanted to be that weirdo. If you pluck me and stick me in cow dung, will you thank me when I see the end? I don't think I will thank you. I thank you all. See you tomorrow. Chapter 1061. Yi Hongyu's calm voice was heard in the dim divine hall of judgment. She looked at Hierarch Xiong Chumo and slowly lifted her right hand from the seat of heavenly black jade, just like a ship leaving a southern port. Then, let's do it. There was no fear in her beautiful eyes. Her calm emotions revealed a strong self-confidence and an indomitable determination. Even this hopeless battle could not make her feel any despair. The hierarch, Zhao Nanhai, and the middle-aged priest stood at 3 different corners of the hall, looking at her in silence. Such a powerful team had no reason to doubt themselves. Even if the woman beside the seat of heavenly black jade was Yu Lian, they were confident that they could take her down. But they still had to be cautious. Because tonight their opponent was the youngest great divine priest of judgment in the history of the divine halls of West Hill. She was probably the best fighter in the Peach Mountain in the past 1,000 years. She would not win, but she would not lose so easily. Yi Hongyu's hand left the seat of heavenly black jade. The dim light in the hall changed as if thousands of rays of light were picked up by her fingers like a spider web. The moonlight and starlight outside the hall refracted beautifully. The space in the hall was about half the height of a person, and there seemed to be an ocean of stars. She stood quietly in the starlight, as holy and beautiful as a virgin in the divine kingdom. As her hand moved, the ocean of stars gradually floated up. The moonlight and starlight refracted more and more intensely. Finally, they arched and formed a geometric shape of light. It was a combination of sharp lines. It was a sword. She held a sword made of light. The surface of the sword was as smooth as clear lake water. The surface of the sword reflected the blood-red robe of judgment, as if there was a red fish swimming in it. It was an illusory sword, but it was real. It was her Taoist sword. Outside the hall, a gust of wind blew. The snowflakes danced in the air, making the moonlight and starlight restless. The wind poured into the hall through the balcony and touched the sword in her hand, waking up the red fish in the sword. Yi Hongyu woke up. Her clothes were the first thing that woke her up. The blood-red divine robe of judgment trembled slightly, like a red flower in the morning that had absorbed too much dew. The red flower trembled slightly. She appeared in front of Zhao Nanhai dozens of feet away. Her first attack was on Zhao Nanhai. Maybe it was because the great divine priest from the South Sea was the weakest among the three. Zhao Nanhai was at the peak of the knowing destiny state, but he was still relatively weak. This fact could only make people feel even more hopeless. Tonight's battle in the Divine Hall of Judgment was a real battle between the strongest. For her, it was a losing battle. But she still wanted to give it a try, because she was not used to giving up before the battle was over. Just like what she had told Ning Kei many years ago, since they were going to fight, they had to win. Yi Hongyu floated in the sea of stars like a bloody flower. She did not think of anything but victory. She was so focused that it was terrifying. Her picturesque eyes were like mountains and rivers. Her black hair was like a waterfall and she wore a divine crown that was as heavy as mountains and rivers. As the great divine priest of judgment, she carried the mountains and rivers with her. A green mountain and a stream of water came from the night sky. Even with Zhao Nanhai's cultivation base and Taoist heart, he could not help but feel shocked. Zhao Nanhai wanted to evade, but his feet were rooted to the smooth floor of the Taoist hall like they were made of iron. He was very calm and knew that he could not evade. He could not even think about it. Yi Hongyu chose him to evade for a moment. Zhao Nanhai could not evade or retreat. Because if he did, he would leave an escape route for Yi Hongyu. Tonight was a battle between the strongest cultivators of Haotian Taoism. They could not afford to leave an escape route. They could not leave an escape route. They could not leave an escape route, not only for the enemy but also for themselves. Looking at the mountains and rivers falling from the night sky and the beautiful woman in the painting of mountains and rivers, Zhao Nanhai's expression became extremely determined. His Taoist robe was set ablaze in the cold wind. He was the current great divine priest of the South Sea. He had inherited the legacy of the great divine priest of light from 600 years ago. He had cultivated the most profound West Hill divine skills and was burning the purest Haotian divine flame. He burned himself and turned himself into a candle, illuminating the dark Taoist hall. Yi Hongyu came in front of him and entered the world of light. She held the virtual sword made of light and looked calm. She did not stab out. Her divine robe fluttered and looked a little pale under the light. She entered the world of light just like a vermilion bird, diving into the forest without hesitation. The world of light and the burning forest were filled with horrible killing intent. Would the vermilion bird's feathers be burnt? Would the flower of blood bloom? Yi Hongyu looked indifferent. She did not care because she was also burning. Endless Haotian divine flame gushed out from her body and penetrated the bloody divine robe of judgment. It broke through Zhao Nanhai's Haotian divine flame and swept across the forest. The forest was burning. The vermilion bird in the forest also started burning. It spread its wings in the night sky and spat out flames. Countless sparks splashed on the stone walls. The petals of the flower of blood turned into transparent flames. It was chilling and horrible. West Hill divine skills against West Hill divine skills. Haotian divine flame against Haotian divine flame. She was the great divine priest of judgment, but she was also the Tao addict who knew everything. She had learned the West Hill divine skills since she was young. How could she be unfamiliar with the Haotian divine flame? Who was more powerful, her divine skill or Zhao Nanhai's? They were both at the peak of the knowing destiny state. They were both powerful divine skills. One was old and ruthless, while the other was young and powerful. If it were any other time, there would be no answer. But tonight was special. Zhao Nanhai was here to kill. He would not risk his life, no matter how determined he looked. Yi Hongyu was burning her soul and life, even though she was expressionless. The divine hall of judgment shone brightly, and the temperature suddenly rose. The tables and chairs engraved with flowers instantly turned into ashes, and even the black jade throne began to emit green smoke. The hierarch looked serious and took a step into the battlefield. The middle-aged priest lowered his head. No one knew what he was thinking. Suddenly, a howl came from the blazing sea of divine flame. The howl was clear and sharp. It sounded like a bird, a legendary bird. Xiong Chumo's expression changed again. The middle-aged priest still lowered his head. His face was illuminated by the Haotian divine flame and looked serious. Sparks flew and the flames split. A path appeared in the sea of fire. A blood-red phoenix flew out from the depths of the sea. As soon as it spread its wings, the divine hall started to burn. There was no real phoenix in the divine hall of judgment. There was only the purest and most solemn Haotian divine flame. She flew in front of the divine flame like a proud and violent phoenix. The light dimmed and Zhao Nanhai appeared on the ground. His face was pale and there was blood at the corner of his mouth. Obviously, he was badly injured. He looked at the phoenix with admiration and sympathy. The youngest judge in the history of Haotian Taoism was unbelievably powerful. However, she had to die because she was so powerful. The more powerful she was, the more Haotian Taoism would not allow her to live. Zhao Nanhai was defeated and injured in this contest of divine skills. But Yi Hongyu did not achieve her goal. Zhao Nanhai did not step aside and she was still in the battlefield. She did not defeat Zhao Nanhai, the weakest one, at the beginning. It was a pity that she could not leave. But there was no sign of regret on her face. Or maybe it was because Zhao Nanhai was not her real target. The fire of Haotian's divine flame that burned the stone walls made her graceful body heat up a little. Or maybe it was just a warm-up. Under the cover of the raging sacred flame, she came to Xiong Chumo at an incredible speed in the hall and in the chaos of light. Or maybe this was her goal. In the deepest part of her eyes, there were countless stars vanishing. It was hard to see what she was thinking. Her right hand holding the sword was hidden in the blood-red gown of judgment. It was hard to see if it was stiff or not. She was holding a virtual sword in her hand, which was also her natal Taoist sword. She did not use her sword when fighting against Zhao Nanhai. Now that she was here, would she use her sword or not? The next moment, her sword was still in the scabbard. The sword and the scabbard were both fake and real. The next moment, the scabbard was gone and the sword appeared in front of her. She used her sword. An extremely sharp sword style was generated in the bright Taoist temple. It tore the air in the temple. The sword style that stood at the peak of the 5 states was about to tear the space apart. Her sudden and decisive turn in the air was unimaginably fast. This sword will was even faster. Even Lu Bai and Jun Emo at their peak could only be as fast as this. In front of the sword intent, if it was any other expert, they would probably be cut into 2 by the sword. But the one she was going to kill was the master of the divine halls of West Hill. It was difficult. Xiong Chumo looked serious. His pupils shrunk to the size of black beans. He had been prepared since she left the sea of fire. When the sword style came to him, he had already reached his hands into the night sky. The night sky was dark. There was no light. But the divine kingdom was right there. Facing a dangerous enemy like Yi Hongyu, Xiong Chumo did not hesitate to use his strongest move. It was also the key to victory. An extremely powerful force, a force that didn't belong to the human world, came from the depths of the night sky, from the divine kingdom, across tens of thousands of miles, through countless clouds and mountains, and poured into his body. Tianqi. Yi Hongyu's sword was already at the peak of the 5 states. It was only a hair's breadth away from the sky. But Xiong Chimo's state had surpassed the 5 states. It came from the sky. Even if it was only a hair's breadth away, it was still a distance that was hard to cross. Xiong Chimo's thin and short body suddenly became extremely mighty and huge, like a heavenly god. In his body, there seemed to be an endless amount of power surging and boiling. He reached out his right palm and slapped at Yi Hongyu. The childlike palm swayed like a cattail leaf fan in the process of breaking the wind. The huge fan-like palm grabbed the throat of the fire phoenix. In the dazzling white divine light, the fire phoenix screeched shrilly. Although it was difficult to write, it was a very good start. Happy holidays and interesting life. See you tomorrow. You're tuning into the Biyao's Wuxia Chronicles YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.